of the War of the Nine Penny Kings or even against the Rains and Tarbecks, Tijet commented. Tijet looked around at the many banners assembled here at the Golden Tooth. All gathered to answer Tywin's call. His call for war against the Northerners. The Northerners whom had achieved a lucky victory at the Battle of the Crossroads. Tijet spotted the banners of House Lannister, the highest of them all. And amongst the Lannister banners were those of Houses Banefort, Marbrand, Crackle, Westerling, Farman, Leiden and Lefford, the principal and most powerful bannermen of the Westerlands. And then there were the banners of Houses Clegane, Lork, Sarsfield, Serret, Istron, Greenfield, Kenning, Swyft, Payne and Plum. "How many men do you think?" asked Geryon. Tijet shrugged. "I should think 50,000, if not more, once all are assembled and ready." Geryon whistled. Even the lucky Eddard Stark would struggle against that. Tijet enjoyed war. He had fought twice. He had fought as a squire in the War of the Nine Penny Kings, where he had killed 4 men at the final battle alongside Tywin and Kevan. And again in the Rain Tarbeck revolt. Tijet was good at war. He was one of the most skilled fighters in the Seven Kingdoms. And that combined with Tywin's tactical brilliance on the battlefield, he felt, turned the armies of the Westerlands into the best fighting force in the entirety of the Seven Kingdoms. "I will enjoy this war. The war against the Northerners will be a fine opportunity for all the realm to see the might of the West against the armies of the North. What better test of our might than against the hardy and now battle-hardened warriors of the North? Even with the legends they tell of Eddard Stark, the young wolf." "How long do you think it will take before we are ready to march?" asked Geryon as the two began to make their way back to the Golden Tusk Keep. "Another week, perhaps. And that is just for all the logistical matters. Such as forages, supplies, horses, equipment and carts to bring what is needed for war," Tijet explained. "And then there will be a long march to fight the Starks," said Geryon. "Indeed, brother. By which time, they will have marched through the Riverlands, and perhaps into the den of the sleeping dragon that is the Crownlands," said Tijet. "Would he do such a thing?" asked Geryon. "He might. He just might. Now that Umril Celtigar is dead and his army crushed, there is little stopping them from marching into the Crownlands and mocking Aerys." "Mocking him?" asked Geryon. "Yes. By fighting and winning battles in the kingdom which contains the capital and seat of House Targaryen, Stark would just be mocking Aerys. It would be akin to when Aerys was imprisoned at Duskendale. That didn't end well for the Darklings," Geryon pointed out. "It didn't. But having said that, Daenerys Darklyn was alone against many. Whilst Eddard Stark has a large army still. Less than 30,000 men. All hardened from battle already. And will all believe in the legends that they tell across the Seven Kingdoms. Of the fearless young wolf whom marches to avenge his father and brother," Tijet explained. "Brother, do I hear admiration in your voice?" Geryon asked. "I make no secret of that, Geryon. I admire any great warrior whom defies expectations and wins great victories in spite of the odds being stacked against them. The odds were clearly against him, and yet he prevailed against an army larger than his own," Tijet explained without shame or embarrassment. They took their places in the feasting hall of Lord Leo Lefford. And as Tijet sat down, he looked around the hall of the Lord of the Golden Tooth. Tijet saw the sons of Tybalt Crickehall arm wrestling any whom dared to test their strength against the brawny and muscular Crickehalls. Adam Marbrand was dancing with Lord Lefford's beautiful and blushing younger sister, Alysanne. Gregor Clegane had disgustingly downed the entirety of a wine jug in just one gulp. And Quentin Banefort was silently looking around the hall with his blood-red and unblinking eyes. "My lords." Tywin's voice was laced with clear authority and dominance. And all nobility gathered in the Golden Tooth heard it well, for they stood with Tijet, Geryon and Kevan at the head of the table. "Is this it? Do we march for war soon? I would first like to thank Lord Lefford for his hospitality to the Golden Tooth." A polite applause was made for the Lord of the Golden Tooth. "But now, all preparations are complete. Tomorrow, we march for war against the northern rebels and traitors that dare to defy the authority of the Iron Throne." Notes: Lyanna sets foot in Storm's End for the first time, and Davos with her. And now Tywin prepares to march for war after the defeat at the Crossroads. Chapter 66, A Mysterious Message. Summary. John Connington makes plans on behalf of his beloved Roriger. Whilst Baylor marches with the Reach army. And Elia is conflicted on what to do. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Interlude 6. John Connington, Steve Waddington. It is good to be back home. It is so beautiful here. I can see why Father enjoyed looking out at the lands from this balcony, John thought as he drank from a cup of wine and looked out at the landscape from Father's favorite balcony. John. Cousin. John turned around and saw Cousin Ronald entering his solar. I'll be there in a moment, Cousin. John cleared his throat and wiped the few drops of wine on his beard before re-entering his solar. Planning to take flight and skin change into a griffin? Ronald asked. Oh, if only. That would make my childhood dream come true, John commented. And mine. I might have become like the pale griffin as I had dreamt of as a boy, Ronald added. To our business then, Cousin? John asked before offering to pour him a cup. Ronald nodded with a smile before John refilled his own cup and then filled Ronald's. What news is there from the Stormlands? Asked John. Very little, I'm afraid. Little? John asked. Ronald took his filled cup and sipped from it. I have had word from Houses Caffin, Fell and Grandison. They have agreed to pledge their armies to fight for the cause. Other minor noble houses will join also. But the rest will not, he replied. Do you know why? Ronald grimaced as he nodded. This morn, I received a raven from a friend of mine in Estermont, Lomas. He says that for 2 reasons the bannermen will not answer any call to arms. And they are. They do not wish to anger the Baratheons. And they are reluctant to follow any call to war from King's Landing after what happened to Rickard and Brandon Stark, he said with a disgusted frown. John nodded in understanding. He grimaced as his mind thought back to the day. He had spent the rest of the day retching and staring at the walls of his bedchambers in horror. He couldn't even look at or go near a fire after what he had seen. It disgusts me too, Cousin. I was there. For weeks I couldn't even look at a fire without thinking of what I saw. I had spent that entire day retching up my breakfast and lunch. I couldn't even have any dinner. And that scene was replaying constantly in my mind and in my dreams. Ronald gasped and shuddered slightly at what he described. But this must be done. It must, John agreed with a nod. And so that when this war is over, a far better king might sit the Iron Throne and do what is right by the realm, John continued. Roriger is just the king the realm needs. He is perfect. He is beloved by the small folk. He sings for children and donates coin to build orphanages. He is perhaps one of the most skilled fighters and jousters in the realm. And he has been raised to be a great and good king since he was a boy. But first, this war must end. Only once this war is over, then we can remove Aerys. I don't know what it was in which Rickard and Brandon Stark had done to invoke Aerys' wrath, but no man deserves to die like that. It feels wrong to be doing this. Eddard Stark's cause is just. I would be doing the same in his position. If someone had done to Father, to Ronald or to my Silver Prince what happens to the Starks? But with an army of hardy Stormlanders, I can defeat the Stark army. Umril Celtigar was a soft-headed lackwit and adult. Crownlanders are soft and weak. The Stark army will find different when they face an army of able and hardy Stormlanders. Jon's long-awaited dream of fighting for glory, for House Connington and for his Silver Prince had at last come. He was ready to fight to the very end for Roriger. But he was also glad of the chance to humiliate and anger Robert Baratheon. Merely by not taking part in this war, he gives me the chance to gain glory for myself. I should thank him for this when the conflict is over and Roriger overthrows Aerys. All because Eddard Stark is his friend and his sister is betrothed to that drunken and arrogant stag, John thought before he remembered the beating he received from Robert's hands at Storm's End. Baelor 8. Baelor stroked Brightwind's mane. He looked around the lands of House Footley as the Reach army marched through them. It had felt like only yesterday that he had come to the seat of House Footley in search of the sword Vigilance. He looked down at the sword, now sheathed at his belt. He couldn't help but admire the gems on the hilt and the pommel. Father had paid a small fortune to replace them. Emeralds and small diamonds were now engraved to replace the faded gemstones once engraved in it. And of course a finely carven emerald in the shape of a roaring flame replaced the former emerald. The irony hadn't escaped Baylor. The irony that once again vigilance was wielded by a high tower. And that soon, he would be taking it into battle against the Northerners. But he remembered that the last time it was taken into battle against the Northerners and two high towers wielded the sword against a hardy and mighty Northern warrior, only to be slain by him. I pray that I do not die as either Ormond or Bryndon Hightower died. Not when I have so much to live for. Not when I haven't told her how I feel. Not when all I can think about is her. Sir Baylor. Baylor turned around to see Mace Tyrell's squire. One of his many cousins, Leo. Ironic. He has many cousins. He also has a few cousins of House Tyrell whom are named Leo. Yes. Baylor asked with a polite smile. My Lord Tyrell summons you to the head of the army, he said. Baylor rolled his eyes at that, not that he could see. Thank you. I shall see him at once, Baylor replied with a smile and a nod. As the young Tyrell left, Baylor sighed with annoyance. Why did father marry my sister to that damned fool? Mace is a ground fool and moron. He cannot make any decisions for himself without his thorny mother correcting him for all his errors along the way. As he rode towards the head of the Reach army, Baylor sighed with exhaustion. He had felt this exhaustion since the day they had left Hightower with the Hightower army and then marched for Highgarden. And he felt it now, as they marched from Highgarden to the Riverlands with the army of the Reach. The fact that he was going to war wasn't on his mind. Nor that he was taking vigilance into battle. And for once, since it began, it wasn't the arrogance of his good brother. It was the promise of seeing Elia again, which returned a bright smile to his face. But what annoyed Baylor was why they were fighting. In spite of what the letters from King's Landing claimed, Baylor was angry for fighting the just cause of the Starks and of the famed young Wolf. Ace has truly gone too mad. To burn a Lord Paramount and his heir to death, is as cruel as it is mad. Baylor rolled his eyes when he saw Mace. He was talking grandly and splendidly with Elwood Meadows and Paxter Redwine. 7 Grant me patience to deal with my fool of a good brother, he inwardly prayed before Brightwind came to the head of the army. Mace turned and saw him. He beamed at seeing him. Baylor. My dear friend. Thank you for coming, he said gratefully. Not at all, Mace, he said before they shook hands. I was just telling Elwood and Paxter of the glory all houses of the Reach we shall earn in this war against the Northerners, said Mace. Indeed, Mace. But is it not unfortunate to leave home now? Indeed it is, my friend, Mace replied. For when they were soon to leave Highgarden, Aelary had given birth to Baylor's handsome third nephew Loras. But all shall be well. We will all return home with stories and tales of grand glories, Mace said optimistically. I am sure, Mace. Though I feel that we shouldn't treat this as though it is just some tourney to win. For Eddard Stark did not win at the crossroads with mere luck, Baylor advised. Mace chuckled at that. Come now, Baylor, good brother. It is true that Eddard Stark was fortunate at the crossroads, but that will remain his only victory. It is the Reach army that shall earn greater glory when we defeat him on the battlefield and all barbaric Northerners crumble before the mighty knights of the Reach, he said proudly. Elia 11. Elia had finished writing the letter. But as she sealed it, she gave it some thought. She grumbled as she wondered how she had become so indecisive. Elia turned to the door. Briefly inhaling and exhaling, Elia stood up. I will give him one final chance. I have let him run this aground numerous times now. At Harrenhal. And 3 times we had a chance to, here in the capital. He might be indecisive, but he has to make a choice. Now. She left their bedchambers. She passed the nursery on her way to find him. Elia glanced inside to see Miria, Lara and Viserys all playing with Rhaenys, Aegon and Visenya. As always, Elia couldn't go anywhere without greeting her children. She kissed the heads of Rhaenys, Aegon and Visenya before her friends and her good brother resumed playing with them. My little dragons. They all look so precious, she thought fondly before finally leaving the nursery. She now continued with determination to find their father. It upset Elia that in recent days and weeks, Rhaegar had made little effort to see either Rhaenys, Aegon or Visenya. Instead claiming that he had to read and study prophecies in the great library. As Elia walked with Sir Jaime, she knew that her options were limited to a few. But, she was willing to give Roriga just one last chance. Elia and Sir Jaime walked into the great library. She saw Roriga seated down at his usual table. Books and scrolls were sprawled across the table, and a few candles were all that provided light as Roriga made notes on parchments with a quill and inkpot. Elia turned to her protector. "Give me a moment of privacy, Sir Jaime," she said. "Of course, Princess," he said with a smile. Elia beamed in reply before turning to Roriga, whom seemingly hadn't seen or heard them enter. "Roriga," she asked gently. Roriga turned to face her, his hands filthy with ink. "Elia. Is something wrong?" he asked. Elia felt a slight frown at the question. "There once was a time when you were happy to see me. I just came by the nursery." Viserys was playing with Rhaenys, Aegon and Visenya, she said with a smile, hoping that mention of them would remind him that he was a father. He nodded with a smile. But then he turned back to his work. "Roriga. Your children. You barely make any time to see them," she said. "I know, Elia. I know. But this work, it takes precedence. I just see it through. The dragon may now have 3 heads, but that does not mean that all is finished." "There is still so much to do," he replied. "There is much to do. But that is for later. Not when there is a crisis which threatens the realm, Roriga. A war in which thousands have already died. And thousands more will die whilst he is still sat on the Iron Throne, and peace is not made between we and the Starks," Elia said, hoping to awaken his sense of right. "I know, Elia. But the time is not right. We will act against my father. But first, I must make sure that the information I have is all correct. This work is also important. I need to make sure I am writing it down correctly and not misinterpreting any of the wording," he replied. "I'm disappointed." Elia turned and shook her head before she faced Sir Jaime. "Back to my bedchambers, I think, Sir Jaime," she said. "Already, my princess?" "It is still early in the evening, if you do not mind my saying so," he commented. "Not at all, sir. I just need to have the Grand Maester send a letter and then I shall spend some time with my little dragons," she replied. She returned to her bedchambers and took the letter. "I gave you a chance, Roriga," she thought. With Sir Jaime, she walked to the rookery, leaving Maegor's hold fast. They arrived at the rookery and saw Pycelle giving a tonic to a servant. "Ensure it gets to the Queen as soon as possible." "Yes, Grand Maester," said the servant. The Grand Maester stood up when he saw Elia. "My princess, good evening." "And you also, Sir Jaime," he said. "And to you, Grand Maester. I was hoping that you could have this letter sent at once," she said as she held up the letter in question. "Of course, my princess. Where does it go?" "To Sunspear," she replied. He took the letter and tied it to the leg of a raven. As Elia and Sir Jaime left the rookery, she looked up at the night sky and saw the flapping wings of the raven. "I pray it reaches Sunspear soon. This war has gone on long enough. And Aes has ruled for too long." Notes. John Connington, Robert's bitter rival, struggles to gather an army of Stormlanders on his Silver Prince's behalf. Whilst the Reach army is marching towards Ned and the Northern Army. All whilst Elia has sent a mysterious message to an unknown recipient. Chapter 67, The Kalin Canal. Summary. Ned plans for war, now that more armies are closing in. All whilst Ashura observes a demonstration of the Kalin Canal. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Robert IX. They were all gathered in Ned's tent. Since the great victory at the crossroads, the army had marched forth until they stopped in borders between the lands of House Root and House Daeari. Both of whom were lickspittles for Aes, Robert knew well. But Ned had called a meeting now that news had come. The news came in the form of the mighty and renowned Blackfish, recently returned from another scouting expedition. Though spirits were high, that of the great Blackfish alone did not seem high on morale. "I have received word from my own spies at Pink Maiden and from Wayfarer's Rest. 2 larger armies march into this war. One from the Westerlands and the other from the Reach." "How many men in these armies, Sir Brynden?" asked Sir Wendell Marndale. 50,000 in the Lannister army, commanded by Tywin himself. But 60,000 in the Tyrell army, with that flowery fool Mace Tyrell leading it, he explained. The army of Mace Tyrell is one thing. But the army of the Lannisters is another. And with someone like Tywin Lannister in command. Never mind the fact that Mace Tyrell will have thousands of armored knights on armored horses. The northern lords muttered with excitement and nervous apprehension at the news before Sir Brynden called for silence. There is another matter, he said. What? Fuck, is there another army coming for us? From Dawn. Which is, Sir Brynden? Asked Jorah Mormont. An army marches from the capital. It is of the survivors of the crossroads, as well as reinforcements from the Riverlands and from the Vale. I saw the army with my own eyes. They number 40,000 men, he replied. Robert turned to Ned at the news. 3 armies, he asked. Yes, Ned. My spies caught sight of all of them. Trustworthy men also, he replied. The army from the Crown Lands. Who commands them? Asked Roose Bolton. 3 men, Mark Grafton, Jonnet Hordeary and Barristan Selmy. At the mere mention of the renowned Barristan the Bold, many in the tent nervously expressed doubt. Fuck all these cunts. We were victorious at the crossroads. And we can emerge victorious once again. Shut it. Ned roared. All were silent and turned to Ned. Ned exhaled lightly before he spoke. It goes without saying, we cannot let these armies unite. Now, Sir Brynden, how far away are the armies of the Lannisters and Tyrells? The Tyrell army is closer, in spite of how large it is. It's almost as if Mace Tyrell is racing to get to us first before Tywin can, he replied. Robert chuckled at that. He was joined by Willam, Mark, Jeffrey, Jon, Mage Mormont, Ricard Karstark and the great Jon Umber. The Tyrell army is perhaps 10 days marching away from us. As for the Lannister army, better organized and disciplined, is 2 weeks away, he explained. And the army from the Crown Lands? How far away are they? Asked Ned. They left the Crown Lands 3 days ago and are marching for Castle Deary lands presently, he replied. Lord Stark, we can crush them before they reach Castle Deary. And then we can use the position to break the Tyrell army before we come face to face with Tywin Lannister himself, eagerly said Mage Mormont. Robert was impressed with how Ned presented himself to the nobility of the North. Before the great battle of the crossroads, many did not believe in Ned or their chance of victory against the multitude of enemies arrayed against them. But ever since Ned struck down Umril Celtigar, not one dared to think otherwise of Ned or doubt his chance of victory against Aes. Ned nodded before looking down at the map. We will march in a few hours. We march for the heartland of Castle Deary lands and to Sludgy Pond. We will meet them there and crush them, using the landscape of the pond, the streams and rivers to our advantage, Ned explained. Robert grinned excitedly at the thought of fighting 3 more armies. Not only that, but armies larger than their own. If there was something that Robert truly loved, it was a challenge. He loved the thought of facing armies that outnumbered his own army. And now more battles were within his reach. One made up of Lickspittle Crownlanders, Riverlanders and Valiman. A second made up of the flowery and pompous Reachmen. And a third made up of the arrogant and gold-obsessed Westerlanders. This will be a glorious war. And it will be a war worth fighting. History may not know I was here and that I fought against the many thousands of enemies that march for Ned. But it will all be worth it. To swing my hammer. To crush all men that dare to step in my path. Ashura X. Ashura was the one whom attended the ceremony at Ricard's dream project. The Kaelin Canal. That which he had first began to plan at the time of Brandon's birth. And now had finally reached fruition. For as Ashura looked down from the children's tower of Moat Cailin, she beamed with amazement at what lay before her. Lady Stark. Ashura turned to face Maester Markle, the Maester appointed to Moat Cailin and was regent of Moat Cailin for the time being until someone was appointed Lord of Moat Cailin. It was to be Ned. Until Ricard and Brandon were murdered. It still felt strange to be addressed as Lady Stark. Since marrying Ned, she was referred to as Lady Ashura. But now, ever since the news came of the murders in King's Landing, it had taken a lot of getting used to when she was referred to as Lady Stark. Yes, she asked. Sir Hakon awaits your word at White Harbour to begin the voyage, he said. Ashura looked out from the balcony back onto the canal. before she turned back to face the Maester of Moat Cailin. "Do it," she ordered. He nodded and took his leave. Ashura returned to the balcony and sat back down. She glanced out of the corner of her eye. She saw an archer of Moat Cailin light an arrow aflame before he loosed it at the sky. Ashura turned to face the direction of the city of White Harbour. Maester Muckle joined Ashura and passed her his personal Mirish spyglass. Ashura pressed it to her eye and looked ahead at the only city of the north. And she soon spotted it, as the sails were raised and the oars dug into the water. Sir Hakan Moller, a ship's captain in the Mandaeli fleet, sailed the flagship of said fleet, the Great Green Hand. He was sailing it from the port of White Harbour. Sailing it through the White Knife River, through the newly built canal until it reached the shorelines of Flint's Finger. All in a voyage of 2 hours. If the voyage was absolutely successful, flames would light from the top of the iron tower of Flint's Finger. But if there was a problem, archers would fire flaming arrows from the top of the iron tower. Ashura watched as the Great Green Hand exited the port and sailed into the waters of the White Knife River. The North will become richer, stronger and more powerful with this. And it can be used to welcome merchants from the East. As well as trading in their goods, we can learn from the free cities and even the Golden Empire of Yeti. And even build improvements which none in Westeros possess. We already have the Valyrian roads. And an abundance of mines and quarries across the north, providing a steady stream of minerals and resources that would rival the Westerlands. The Cailin Canal will always be Ricard's legacy. He has started something that will last in the north for all of history. Which shall be the envy of all kingdoms of Westeros. Were Quarian Greyjoy as notorious a reaver as his grandfather, the Iron Fleet would be constantly raiding the canal. And force the north to build a fleet to match the Iron Fleet. But then Ashura reminded herself that the north remained at war. The news of the victory at the crossroads had spread like wildfire across the north. Indeed, the celebrations in the taverns across Winterfell loudly rang out throughout the night upon receiving the news of the victory. Once the war is over, and Ned has returned home, then the canal shall become the crowning jewel of the North's economy. The profits from mining and arboriculture are all well and good. But it is from this that House Stark and the North shall truly rise and become one of the most powerful kingdoms of Westeros, if not the world. It is only right. For the North is the largest of the 7 kingdoms. It is larger than all others combined. And it has been ruled by House Stark for over 8,000 years. Older than old Valyria. And Aerys truly thinks he is above mighty House Stark. Ashura continued to watch as the ship sailed beneath them until it passed by the Drunkard's Tower. "My lady, all is well," excitedly said Maester Muckle. "Yes, indeed. But it is not over yet," Ashura pointed out. Though she managed to contain her own excitement. When the ship sailed out of sight, Ashura looked up to see a servant bring lunch for both she and Maester Muckle. As Ashura drank a cup of the favoured mead of the north, Carhold Bronze, she heard the Maester's excited voice. "My lady. Look. From the Iron Tower. Could it be? Is it?" Ashura looked up and saw a great beacon alight from the very top of the Iron Tower. "It is done. The Cailin Canal is truly complete." Notes. The Cailin Canal is a success, capable of bringing vast wealth and resources to the north. And now Ned plans to fight each enemy army, one by one, rather than let them unite and fight him as one unified force. But, let's be honest, that would never happen. For each army wants the glory of defeating him to themselves. Chapter 68, Autumnstead. Summary. The war continues. They fight the remnants of the last army they fought, along with reinforcements from loyalists of the Vale and the Riverlands. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Elberot 8. Camped on the outskirts of Castle D'Ari, they reached the waters of the sludgy pond. Elberot stood in Ned's tent as they awaited the arrival of Sir Brynden and Jeffrey. Jeffrey, easily bored, had decided to join the Blackfish on his scouting expeditions. Elberot looked up when the tent's flap was moved aside for the arrival of Sir Brynden and Jeffrey. "My lord," said the Blackfish with a nod before he removed his helmet. "Sir Brynden. Welcome back. Was all well?" "All went fine, yes," he replied. Jeffrey backed that up with a firm nod. "Now, what news do you bring?" asked Ned. "The enemy army are nearing us. They'll be upon us in 2 days' time," one if they decide not to camp and rest their army, Geoffrey explained. Ned hummed at that. Elbert turned to him. Ned pursed his lips before he spoke. Very well. We will meet them then, at the village of Autumnstead, Ned said, pointing at a village around the sludgy pond and the small river Dare. At that, both the Blackfish and Geoffrey nodded with approval, whilst the northern bannermen muttered amongst themselves. What is the significance of this place? Asked Elbert. The waters around it are perfectly formed for inviting an enemy army into a trap, said the Blackfish. And there are perfect vantage points to hide a force of cavalry before it can outflank said enemy army, Geoffrey added. That all depends on our enemy. Will Grafton fall for such a trick? Asked Roose Bolton. All turned to Elbert at the question. At which he nodded. He will, Lord Bolton. He is no soldier, he's a merchant with ideas far above his station, he replied. What of the others? Dare. And Selmy, asked the great Yonumber. Dare may be a loyal dog of Varys, but he is no fool, said Geoffrey. True, but he has never commanded on the battlefield, nor has he ever actually fought in a war, said Robert. And that leaves Sir Barristan. He is the only capable man amongst them. He may be a great knight with incredible skill, but he has never commanded men on the battlefield before, said the Blackfish. So, they will fall for a trap? Asked Kyle. I should think so, said Sir Brynden. Ned nodded before he hovered his hand over the map. We will keep a large force of infantry on the other side of the Dare River, at a shallow point. Shallow enough that they can cross, but not too shallow that they cannot cross without difficulty. As they struggle to cross to fight us, archers will keep them from breaking the front lines. And they will send their cavalry to try and find another way around us. Sir Brynden shall command the cavalry and smash them as they try and flank us. Elbert was liking the sound of this plan already. And once their cavalry have been defeated, Ned, asked Yon. Then, we press forward. Our infantry fight theirs and push them back across the river, and then, upon hearing my horn, our cavalry arrive and finish them off with an almighty charge. They left the tent and began making preparations to move to the chosen battlefield, at this village named Autumnstead. Elbert found Geoffrey brushing Pallister. Pallister ate when he saw Elbert approach. Elbert chuckled at that. You neigh because you know, don't you, my friend? You know that battle approaches. And, like the great knight of the Vale you once were in a past life, you want to be where the battle is, don't you? Do we march again, my lord? Asked Geoffrey. Indeed, we do, Elbert replied before patting Geoffrey on his shoulder and then patting Pallister's mane and kissing his long face. When do we leave, my lord? Asked Geoffrey, immediately stood at the ready. Within the hour. So, you best get to your duties at once, Elbert said with a nod. As Geoffrey began to pack his own equipment and armaments, Elbert stroked Pallister's mane. I have fought in battle only once. And is it so terrible I enjoyed it? That I enjoyed the clash of steel. The thrill of fighting, knowing that the next man I face may be the man whom may kill me. Pallister snorted at that. Elbert chuckled before patting him again. Yes, my friend. You know better, don't you? You know that it is not so terrible. For a true knight of the Vale, you know that battle is all a good knight lives for. Interlude 7. Willam Dustin, Tobias Santelman. Willam smirked as he stood with the proud fighting men of Barrowton. He stood at the front, as all true Dustin warriors before him would fight. Growing up, Willam wanted only to live and be like his ancestor, brave Roddy the Ruin. Roderick Dustin, whom led the Winter Wolves in the Dance of the Dragons, and slew both Lord Ormond Hightower and Sir Brynden Hightower with only his axe and one arm before he fell. I am the only living man of the Dustins of Barrowton. I will not die in this war. Nor will I leave Barbary a widow at so young an age. I will fight and earn my name in history. As a great warrior of House Dustin. Willam held up a large battle axe in one hand whilst gripping his shield in his other. And when he saw the southern army approach, he grinned. He saw the cavalry and knights at the front. He recognized a few of them from Harrenhal. But most of all, he recognized Barristan Selmy, a Kingsguard knight of renown and legend. Willam saw their hesitation. He glanced at Ned. Ned took his helm and placed it firmly on his head. It was a frightening helm, Willam thought. shaped like the head of a snarling direwolf. With the reputation surrounding him, as Eddard the young wolf, many men would have to be forced to face him on the battlefield. I saw him fight at the crossroads. He fought like a man possessed by all great Stark warriors of the past. As though all of them joined their fighting skills with his and turned him into the single greatest living warrior in the world. With a pathetic sounding war horn, tens of thousands of southern infantry began to march towards them. All marching under numerous banners of the Crown lands, as well as banners of lickspittles of the Riverlands, and lickspittles of the Vale. But the banner of House Targaryen was highest of them all. You fucking idiot Southerners have looked down on the North for long enough. You have mocked the gods. You have insulted our people. And you have murdered our Lord Paramount and his heir. Without trial. We shall show you all what it means to awaken the cold and wintry fury of the North. The march of the Southern infantry soon turned into a charge. As thousands of them roared and shouted as they lifted high swords, spears, axes, maces and shields in the air. Archers! Loose! Ned roared for all to hear. Willam held his shield up, ready for the inevitable clash. Willam grinned as the arrows loosed upon the oncoming Southern infantry. Hundreds fell from wounds or were killed in the first wave of arrows. And many other infantry collided with them as they were shot down, breaking the momentum of the charge, which only made Willam grin widely. Willam lifted his axe high and bashed it against his shield. Come on, Southern cunts! Where is the dragon which you all bow to? Willam roared before he continued to bash his axe against his shield. Thousands of Northerners, as well as the men of Barrowton laughed, roared and jeered as they did the same in bashing their weapons against their shields. And then they came to the waters of the Dare River. Just as Ned had wanted, the waters were shallow for them to cross and come to blows with them. But now shallow enough that they couldn't cross without difficulty. And Willam grinned at the difficulty they were facing as three men struggled to wrench their feet trapped in the watery mud. All while more arrows, spears and even javelins were fired upon them. Willam continued to laugh before more of them charged towards them. Some began to trip over their own fallen comrades. And the bloody corpses of the fallen in the river began to float down with the river's flow. Willam looked in the distance at the enemy reserves and cavalry. He saw how many of their cavalry began to ride away. Just as Ned predicted. They go now to find somewhere to flank us. Only, they shall soon cross swords with the Blackfish, the cavalry of the Rills and the Knights of White Harbor. Stupid fucking Southerners! Willam roared as he held his axe up and laughed at the Southern archers falling to the few remaining arrows of the Northern archers. The heavy armor of the soldiers and knights weighed them down until arrows, javelins and spears ended their struggles forever. At last, Ned unsheathed ice, holding the enormous great sword in one hand and a war horn in his other. Ricard and Brandon would be proud of you, Ned. Gods, even Theon Stark and Cregan Stark would be proud of you, Willam thought with a smirk and a nod. Ned lifted the horn to his mouth and blew it with a dark and cold wrath. Just as a southern knight wearing the colors of House Valerian came towards Willam. Only for Willam to swing his axe down on his helm. He wrenched his axe free from his head, and the knight fell on his back, blood and brains pouring from his skull. Willam swung his axe across the chest of a soldier coming towards him. He split his chest open. The soldier groaned before Willam raised his axe up high and swung down on his skull. The man fell dead before Willam beheaded another man whom charged towards him with a sword and shield. At them, lads! Ned roared as he lifted ice up high. Willam roared in reply and began bashing his shield against another knight's shield. The knight stumbled from stepping between the corpses of two men. Willam wasted no time in swinging his axe across the knight's throat, which only had chainmail to protect him. Willam joined in the bashing of steel against wood and iron as the enemy attack faltered. For every time that Willam bashed his axe against his shield, it added to the cataclysmic doom that awaited the Southerners as they struggled to even put up a proper fight against the mighty Northern army. Together, they pushed into the Southerners, cutting down more men with every step they made. Willam laughed with every man he beheaded, cut down or eviscerated. Dustin. Barrowton. None so foreboding. Willam roared with pride before he beheaded a knight of House Mouton. Willam looked at the center of the army. He saw Robert, swinging his enormous hammer across, killing 4 men with a single swing before smashing another knight's skull into 1,000 pieces from just thrusting his hammer at him. It takes a mighty strength to swing such an enormous hammer with such speed and still use a shield. And then William saw Ned. He saw Ned behead 5 men with a single swing of ice. Gods! That is fucking incredible. Ned proceeded to impale another man before bisecting 2 men with a single blow. William saw a knight wearing shining gold armor. He was wielding an unblooded sword and shield. William knew the armor well from his time in Harrenhal. He was shouting commands for men to not retreat. And he stood alongside knights of House D'Ari. Sir Jonat Hor D'Ari of the Kingsguard. William grinned at the chance of glory. I wanted glory at the start of this battle. And by the gods, I shall have it. When my axe claims the head of a knight of the Kingsguard. William smashed his shield across a knight who got in his way. He finished him off with a mighty swing of his axe, beheading him. Then he turned to face another. He buried his axe into the man's crotch. He screamed as William ripped the axe away and cut across at his neck. William saw 2 knights accompanying D'Ari run towards him. William drew a dagger from his belt. He threw it at one of the knights. It caught him in his neck. He gasped as blood spurted from his throat and his mouth as he fell on his back. The other knight angrily swung his sword at William. William blocked the swing with his axe. Then he swung his shield across, disarming the knight of his sword. Then he buried his axe into the knight's hip, protected by only chainmail. As he screamed, William beheaded him with a swing of his axe. Now he faced D'Ari himself. "Be you Lord Dustin of Barrowton?" he asked as he pointed his sword at him. "I am." "Be you D'Ari of the Kingsguard?" "I am," he snarled before he thrusted his sword at William. William blocked the thrust with his shield. He proceeded to swing his axe at the man's helm. He groaned at the axe striking his helm. He ripped the helm from his head. Blood poured from his chainmail coif, which was all that protected him. He angrily sliced his sword at William. William parried the sword before he swiftly buried his axe into his belly, just between his breastplate and his belt. Blood spat out as William ripped his axe away. D'Ari collapsed to his knees as William lifted his axe up high. D'Ari stared defiantly at him before William buried his axe into his skull. William panted as he turned to see Ned. Ned just cut down 2 knights before he faced another knight of the Kingsguard. Barristan the Bold himself. This will be a fight for the ages. Ned against Barristan the Bold himself. "Lord Stark, it should not have come to this," calmly said Selmy. It fucking shouldn't have. All for your fucking king, who murdered my brother and my father. And now wants the north to burn." Ned roared before he lifted ice up high. The blade which dripped constantly with the blood of the many Ned had slain. Sir Barristan thrusted his sword at Ned swiftly and with skill. Ned easily parried the sword's thrust. Before he brought ice down on Sir Barristan's shield. He gasped as his shield fell from his grasp. Ned swung ice across, cutting down on the Kingsguard's helm. His helm fell from his head, wounding him slightly. Whilst Ned swung ice around and roared as he leapt up and smashed down on the Kingsguard. Sir Barristan lifted up his sword to protect himself. Only for ice to smash his sword to pieces and cut into his pauldron and his shoulder. Barristan the Bold fell to the ground, wounded, but alive. He reached for his dagger. He pointed it at Ned still. "Very brave man. To the last. Go, Sir Barristan. Take what is left of this army and go back to King's Landing. You have no victory here. Nothing can be gained by continuing to fight," Ned said calmly. Sir Barristan sheathed his dagger. He frowned when he saw the corpse of his fallen sworn brother. "Thank you, Lord Stark," he said before he led what was left of his army away. Whilst Ned lifted ice up high and roared. William cheered loudly as he lifted both axe and shield up high. Notes. Yet another victory for the North. Which is not good news for the Targaryens in King's Landing. Chapter 69, Nothing More I Can Do. Summary. Rhaegar and Elia confront Aerys to end the war. Little good that will do. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Rhaegar X. "We need to do this," Rhaegar said. Elia. Roriger frowned at the idea of this. For so long he had been afraid of father. But now, Elia wished to confront him. To tell him to end this war now. Sir Barristan had only returned that day, with news of the defeat at Autumnstead. And the killing of Sir John at Hoare at the hands of William Dustin. In just 2 battles, 45,000 fighting men loyal to the Iron Throne had been killed whilst an extra 30,000 were wounded. Elia is right, we must stop this war now. After stopping by the nursery, Roriger smiled when he saw Rhaenys playing with Egon and Visenya and introducing both of them to Balerion, whom purred around them and let them pet him and stroke him. I should be making more time to see them. Though the prophecy takes precedence, I am still their father. Roriger and Elia walked together to Father Solar, where Sir Jaime was stood outside. Seeing him there, Roriger frowned. He frowned as he remembered the promise he made to Tywett Lannister. To release Sir Jaime from the Kingsguard once father was removed from the Iron Throne. Before Sir Jaime could ask for leave to enter, a small patrol of 3 household soldiers marched past. "My prince," one said as the 3 bowed their heads to him. But before Roriger could say anything, the 3 quickly walked away. As they left, Roriger glanced back at them. Strange, he thought with a frown. His voice sounded Dornish. And his voice sounded familiar. But from where? How is it that I know his voice? Rather than be concerned by something such as this, Roriger nodded to Sir Jaime. "Good evening, Sir Jaime," Elia said sweetly. "My princess." "My prince," he replied with a bow of his head and a smile. He knocked on the door. "Your Grace. The Crown Prince and Crown Princess beg leave to speak with you," he said. "Show them in." He opened the door and they entered. Sir Jaime closed the door behind him. Roriger faced father, whom snarled cruelly at seeing him. He made no such glance at Elia. "What do you want, O treasonous son of mine?" he demanded. Roriger frowned at this. "Father, we must stop this war," said Roriger. "What do you think I have been doing? I have been having our armies do just that. By marching on Eddard Stark, they will at last crush him for daring to betray his king and daring to mock the dragon. Father, you have the chance to make this right. Make peace with the Starks. Return the remains of the Rickard and Brandon Stark, grant them a pardon, and this will all end. We cannot be fighting our own subjects now. Not when the Triarchy is watching our every move in this war. And watching us make mistakes. No doubt Valerys Del Tala is laughing at us right now for being so defeated at the crossroads and at Autumnstead. They have slain a knight of the Kingsguard. We have awoken a terrible beast by provoking the North, and the gods are punishing us for it. Only for father to laugh. The only one laughing right now is me. I laugh at you, Roriger. For your weakness, your indecisiveness and your incompetence. The Triarchy may be watching this, but make no mistake, they will not dare to make an enemy of the dragons. Not when they hear the tales of what happens to those whom would make an enemy of the dragon and of House Targaryen. The door is behind you. Use it, father snapped. Roriger frowned. He turned at Elia with defeat. But Elia did not look so defeated. She kept a firm gaze focused on father, with no sign of defeat. Nor fear. Instead she showed a sense of determination. "Have you something to say, Dornish trollop?" Father demanded. "Only this. That I am sorry." "What? You are? Whatever for?" "I am sorry, but then again, if things are so, then there's nothing more we can do." Suddenly, as if those words were a signal, the door opened to Father Solar. And entered the 3 soldiers whom had passed Roriger and Elia earlier. And behind them was Sir Jaime. The 3 soldiers removed their helms. Roriger knew whom they were immediately. Quentin Corgyle, Lord of Sandstone. Miles Manwadi, Lord of Kingsgrave. And Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper and Elia's brother. That's whose voice that was. Whilst Oberyn pointed a dagger at father, both the Lord of Sandstone and the Lord of Kingsgrave pointed spears at him. And Sir Jaime kept his sword sheathed, whilst watching the entire scene. What in the 7 hells is this? Whom are you to betray and assault your king? Assault the dragon. Take him away. Roriger was surprised. He had never seen Elia like this before. She gave a command with iron and with authority. She stood with resolve and purpose. Oberyn grabbed father by his neck, before trapping his neck between his arm and pressing the weight of his body against father's body. "Come now, your grace. We have a boat awaiting you." "It wouldn't do to be late," Oberyn said with a malevolent grin. Quentin Corgal drew a leather sack from his pocket and both he and Miles Manwadi placed it over father's head, with Oberyn's arm still wrapped around father's neck. Elia turned to Sir Jaime. "Go and check that the way is clear. And then inform the Grand Maester of what he must do," she ordered. "Princess," he replied with a nod. Father was taken away by the Dornishmen whilst Sir Jaime left to fulfill his order. All whilst Roriger stood speechlessly, watching. He struggled against them. But he had no chance. Roriger frowned as he watched him be taken away. He turned to Elia. But she kept her eyes fixed on him, glaring at him as her younger brother took him away. What in the seven hells was this? Finally Elia turned to face Roriger. Though Roriger was a head taller than she, he felt like she was dwarfing him from how she looked at him. Doing what should have been a long time ago. To end his tyranny. To stop this war. And to make you king. Elia 12. In the throne room, Elia looked down at the gathered nobles and courtiers. She stood by the Iron Throne with Rolla. Roriger was not present. Sir Jaime and Arthur stood before the Iron Throne. And then, Roriger at last entered the throne room, accompanied by Lord Commander Hightower and Sir Oswell. He surprised all by sitting down on the Iron Throne. Gasps, mutters and chatter spread across the nobility gathered in the throne room. With Roriger sat down and both Elia and Rolla stood by his side, he nodded to Sir Gerald. The White Bull loudly called for silence. His Grace, King Aerys, has become very unwell. Unfortunately, this prevents him from fulfilling his duties as King of the Seven Kingdoms, made even worse in these troubling times, Roriger announced. We do of course all pray for his recovery from this illness and that he returns to his duties as soon as he is able, Roriger continued. Elia glanced around the throne room. Until her eyes fell upon Carlton Chelstead, Simond Staunton, Owen Merryweather and Rufus Riker. She could see them clearly. She smirked slightly at seeing them panic so. And worry over the change in power. Good. For all that they did and didn't do, they should be afraid. Roriger nodded to the Grand Maester. Your Grace, in light of these circumstances, it is the law for you to act as Prince Regent for His Grace the King, until such a time as he recovers from his tragic illness. And as Prince Regent, you bear all powers of the King until such a time that His Grace returns to fulfill his duties, Pycelle announced. Thank you, Grand Maester, said Roriger. As Pycelle took his place, standing with Varys and Lucerys Valerian. Lords Staunton, Chelstead and Merryweather. Come forth please, Roriger invited to them. The three lords nervously blanched as they walked before the Iron Throne and bowed to him. My prince, they said. I am sorry to say that I no longer require your respective services on the small council. However, in light of your selfless services, and in thanks to your hard work to the Iron Throne for all your hard work in service to His Grace and to the Seven Kingdoms, I would permit you all to return home with 100,000 gold dragons each and our gratitude. The audience of nobles and courtiers applauded Roriger's show of generosity. They don't even deserve a measly copper. They bowed to Roriger and raised. Thank you, my prince, they said before returning to their places, calmer than they had been before. Carlton Chelstead handed the pin of the hand of the king to Sir Jaime. Will Sir Miles of House Mouton, Lord Richard of House Lunmouth and Lord John of House Connington please come forth? Roriger's three best friends stood before the Iron Throne and knelt before him. I would be honoured to appoint Sir Miles to the position of Master of Laws. To appoint Lord Lunmouth to the position of Master of Coin. And to appoint Lord Connington as my hand of the king. Sir Jaime passed the pin of the hand of the king to John. He accepted it and Roriger's three friends rose and thanked him for their elevation. And with this, they took their places amongst the rest of the small council. But while His Grace is ill, war remains still in the Seven Kingdoms. For now, the rebellious Northern Army, which has already defeated our armies, killing tens of thousands of good men, has now left the Riverlands and is now in the Crown Lands. The nobles and courtiers muttered and gossiped amongst themselves before Sir Gerald once again called for silence. Rest assured, my lords and ladies, as Prince Regent, I shall do all in my power to end the threat that they pose to the security of the Seven Kingdoms and bring the rebel, Eddard Stark, to terms. Terms of peace. Ned is a good man. His cause to rise up was just. But what will Roriger do? As the court was dismissed, Roriger stood up from the Iron Throne. Only he, Elia and Rolla remained. What is to be done about the Northerners? Asked Elia. I will send a messenger to bring terms of peace to them. They will have no choice but to accept. Especially now that the Reach army shall soon be upon them, said Roriger. Where in the Crown lands are they? Asked Rolla. They are presently in the lands of House Buckwell, Roriger replied before he turned to Elia. Elia, where is he? Whom? She asked innocently. Where is father? He asked again. Rolla turned to Elia at this. He is somewhere safe. For the time being, only Oberyn and I know where he is. He is being watched by men loyal to Oberyn and to me. None will release him, she said to both of them. Rolla smiled at the news. But Roriger frowned. And why do you not tell me where? What difference would it make? She asked. I want to speak with him. Personally, he said. You will get that chance. Once the war is over and there is peace. We must keep up appearances until the war is ended and then you may speak with him, she replied gently. I am the king, he said sternly. No, you are Prince Regent. And only because of me. You were being too indecisive to do what had to be done. What you should have done at Harrenhal. How is it my fault that you couldn't even do that? She snapped before turning and taking her leave. Notes. Yes, the letter Elia sent was to Oberyn to ask for help to overthrow Aerys in a coup. And Roriger is shocked by the coup and by just how strong Elia is, making him realize just how much he has underestimated her. The coup is one I had based on the one orchestrated by King Michael I of Romania to overthrow fascist dictator Ion Antonescu, in WW2. Chapter 70, Juniper Hall. Summary. The Northern Army confronts the Reach Army and an overconfident Mace Tyrell. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Eddard 13. Eddard stood with ice in front of the Northern infantry. He looked up at the assembled infantry and cavalry of the Reach. On the fields of Juniper Hall, Eddard looked at the large army stood before them. He turned his head to see Brynden, Elbert, Jeffrey, Willis, Wendell, Mark and Roose Bolton leading the cavalry. Soon after the victory at Autumnstead, they received word that the Reach army was closing in on them. So they moved into the Crown lands. To frighten King's Landing. And to gain a better position to fight the Reach army. Thanks to the scouting of the Blackfish, they soon found a suitable location. They had come to Juniper Hall, a minor holdfast on the lands of House Buckwell of the Antlers. And on the fields of Juniper Hall, they faced the unprepared but eager Reach army. Led by a man whom wanted an easy victory, from all accounts that Eddard had heard of the Lord of Highgarden. And then he looked up and down the lines of infantry, all of whom, he could see, were ready for battle against the flowery men of the Reach. He nodded at Robert, Jon, the Great Jon, Jorah, Mage, Ricard and Willam. My third battle. And what a battle this shall be. Eddard turned to Robert when he felt his large and powerful hand pat him on the shoulder. Don't worry, Ned. These fucking flowery bastards are no match for us, Robert said with a wide grin. Eddard couldn't help but chuckle as he turned back to face the army of Mace Tyrell. A horn blow from the center of the Reach army was sounded. Just as I predicted. Eddard nodded when he saw how the cavalry of the Reach began to leave their positions and link up in the center of the battlefield, readying themselves for an almighty charge. They soon started to ready themselves for a charge. Only for a war horn from the northern flanks to blow. Eddard turned to Sir Brynden, whom began to shout commands to the cavalry. And they soon began to ride far from the battlefield. The Reach cavalry halted their slow pace towards their positions. They halted and watched as the northern cavalry seemingly fled the battlefield. Eddard smirked when the Tyrell cavalry indeed took the bait. Just as he wanted. Stupid flowery bastards, indeed. Eddard stood in front of the northern army. I have brought you all to the fray today, lads. Against the great array of enemies whom come to fight us. But will we be defeated today? No, roared the hard-fighting men of the north. No indeed. No. For these Reachmen, men of flowers, wine and food, are soft men of the south. We were outnumbered at the crossroads. And we were outnumbered at Autumnstead. And today, we shall be victorious once again. Against these damned men of the south. What say you, men of the north? The men of the north cheered, jeered, hooted and shouted for all the southerners to hear. Eddard turned to face the Reachman once again. He held ice up against his helm. Another battle. I fight for the north. For House Stark. For the memory of Father and Brandon. For Benjen and Lyanna. And for Ash and our child. Eddard enhanced his hearing. He smirked at what he heard from the pompous lords of the Reach. He turned to the archers. Archers, ready. Archers began to draw arrows and knock them to their bows. Hold, he roared. Eddard turned to the front lines of the infantry. Spears and shields. Get ready, men. We face their cavalry. Show no fear, lads. Instead, give them a reason to fear you. Give all the southerners a reason to fear you. Eddard roared. Baelor 9. Baelor's eyes narrowed at this development. He watched as their own cavalry halted their charge. Whilst the northern cavalry began to retreat from the battle. Could this be desertion? Or a trap? His thoughts were interrupted by the hearty chuckle of his good brother. Baelor frowned as he turned to Mace. You are many things, Mace. A good father to your children. A good husband to my sister. And a good lord of Highgarden. But a soldier, you are not. You see, Baelor. Their own cavalry retreat from the battlefield. Which shall only make our victory far easier than I had anticipated, Mace said with a pompous and arrogant smile. That is true, Mace. However, I fear that this only appears to be too easy, Baelor insisted in the strongest possible terms. Of course it is too easy, Mace replied with another chuckle. He was glad when he had support from the other bannermen of the Reach. I agree with Sir Baelor, my Lord Tyrell, said Mathis Rowan. As do I, my lord. Eddard Stark has already won 2 great victories. At the Crossroads and at Autumnstead. I doubt that he won those battles solely because of luck, cautiously added Randil Tarly. Baelor turned to Mace. But he remained unconvinced. Only he resumed watching the battlefield unfold. As the cavalry continued to charge at the northern infantry. May the Crone grant Mace wisdom. For his lacking of it may cost House Tyrell and the Reach as a whole very dearly. As much as I do find it difficult to tolerate him, he is still the husband of my sister, whom loves him dearly. And he is the father of my nephews Willers, Garlan and Lauras. Baelor watched as the cavalry, commanded by Titus Peake and Alistair Florent, charged. The northern cavalry rode hard for the west as though the stranger itself was chasing after them. The Reach cavalry halted their charge before they renewed their charge towards the northern front lines. Baelor spotted him stood in front of the northern infantry. There was no mistaking him. He wielded a huge great sword of Valyrian steel that dwarfed both Vigilance and Randil Tarly's own sword Heartspan. And he wore a helm shaped like a snarling wolf's head. Eddard Stark, the young wolf. Eddard Stark seemed to be giving a speech to them. And the speech seemed to invigorate the northerners, in spite of the mass of knights charging towards them. They cheer. 8,000 knights on horseback charge towards them, and they cheer. Sure enough, just as Baelor thought would happen, archers shot at them. He watched as arrows, spears and javelins were fired at the approaching cavalry. In spite of the armor many horses wore, many still struck their targets. And the killing or wounding of horses, riders or both caused chaos as horses behind them were delayed in charging. And then, Baelor watched as the northern infantry thrusted spears and pikes towards them. 7 hells. With no way of getting out, hundreds of horses were impaled or stabbed by pikes and spears. Gods, Baelor muttered in shock. My lord. Baelor turned to Mace. But Mace's shock did not subside as Baelor's had done. He still stared in horror at what he saw. He did not hear the Lord of Hornhill. My Lord Tyrell. This time, he heard him. Send the infantry. Amass them now, Mace commanded. Baelor unsheathed Vigilance and turned back to the enemy. Many cavalry of the Reach began to retreat rather than be faced with spears and pikes of the northerners. And their archers continued to shoot on the Reach cavalry. Advance. Randil Tarly commanded to the infantry. Infantry. Attack, shouted Mathis Rowan. Eddard 14. Eddard threw a pike at a retreating Reach knight. The pike flew through the night and impaled itself into another knight in front of him. Both fell from their horses whilst Eddard unsheathed ice. He cut down another knight. Until he heard a command from the opposite side of the battlefield. Infantry! Attack! Eddard turned to the main host of the Reach army. He nodded and growled ferociously as he watched infantry break ranks and begin to charge. Reform the lines! Reform the lines, he shouted before he blew hard on his war horn. Then he turned back. Archers! Fire all that you've got left! He grinned as he stared at the approaching infantry. Many were tiring out already from the charge. And some were tripping over the bloody corpses of men and horses, which only served to slow their charge towards them, and make them easier targets for the archers. The lines of northern infantry began to reform. Eddard removed his helm. He wanted the southerners to see him. He wanted them to shit themselves at hearing his name or seeing him. Robert, Willam, Jon, Mage, Jorah, the Great Jon and Ricard Karstark all laughed at the approaching Reach infantry. They watched as arrows, spears and javelins fell on the enormous mass of Reach infantry. Eddard roared for all to hear and lifted up ice. He was the first to charge into them. And he could hear Robert, the Great Jon and Jon closely behind him. Eddard relished listening to all brave northerners behind him charge to join battle against the Reach infantry. Winter is coming! Eddard roared. And as he closed ranks, he sliced down on an approaching soldier. He bisected him from his left shoulder to his right hip. Then he swung ice around, beheading 10 men with that single swing. He turned and stabbed one man before bisecting another at his waist. Eddard punched a soldier in the face. His head fell from his shoulders. Then he impaled a dismounted knight. He turned and beheaded 2 more knights with a single swing. Eddard roared for all Reachmen to hear. And he laughed at frightened many were at hearing him and being so close to him. He head-butted a knight whom tried to stab him with a spear. He fell to the ground with a blow to his head that looked as though Robert smashed him with his hammer. But whilst his roars frightened the Reachmen, they only served to invigorate the northern army. As they broke the ranks of the Reachmen, Eddard grinned when he saw how Robert killed many Reachmen with his enormous hammer. He swung his hammer at a reclawed sat on his horse. He screamed as he fell on his back. Robert ran towards him. He lifted high his warhammer and brought it down on his face. His head seemingly exploded from where his hammer struck him. And Eddard turned when he heard the approaching cavalry. The northern cavalry, led by Sir Brynden and Elbert, they fell upon the flank of the Reach infantry. Eddard stabbed another knight as the cavalry smashed into their flank. Another great victory, men of the north! Eddard roared. His men roared in return, and continued to fight the Reachmen, pushing them back and killing them. Eddard saw whom could only be the frightened Lord of Highgarden. Retreat, he heard him shout. And sure enough, the horns of the Reach blared for the Reachmen to hear. The fearful and demoralized men of the Reach threw down their weapons and shields and began to run from the battlefield. Eddard halted. He inhaled and exhaled. He wiped the blood from his face. There was so much. He spat out the blood that he could taste on his lips. Another great victory, lads! Eddard roared as he lifted ice up high for all to see. The northerners roared and cheered. Winter is coming, he roared with pride. Winter is coming, they roared in reply. Notes. A humiliating defeat for Mace Tyrell, one which not even he can turn into a glorious defeat. And yet, another great victory for the Northern Army and for Ned. Chapter 71, The Reputation of the Young Wolf. Summary. The Lannisters hear of Ned's victory against the Tyrells. And good news for both the Starks and the Targaryens. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Tijet 8. At their campsite on the outskirts of Lord Harroway's town, Tijet sparred with Jaime's 2 closest friends from their boyhood days, Sir Adam Marbrand and Sir Lyle Crickehall. There was a distinct contrast in the 2 young knights. Like Jaime, Adam favored in speed and dealing fast blows when countering an enemy. As for the Strongbow, he favored speed and strength, using both a bastard sword and a great shield, which gave him both good offense and good defense. You both fight well, Tijet complimented. But when it comes to battle, you will need to remember that no opponent is ever the same as the last man you slew. You must be quick, precise and decisive. Leave no room for error and never doubt yourself in the moment of victory. Before either of them could say anything, Tijet spotted commotion behind them. Wait a moment, he said. They turned with him to face the commotion at the front of the camp. A rider was riding towards Tywin's pavilion, all wild with haste and causing many soldiers, squires, servants and camp followers to shout at him for nearly riding into them. Tijet was followed by both of Jaime's friends as they neared the tent of the Lord of Casterly Rock. The rider climbed down from his horse. His riding leathers and boots were filthy from earth and stank of sweat and horse, Tijet decided. I have a message for my Lord Lannister. Enter, sir, said one of the red cloaks whom were stood guard outside. The rider entered the pavilion. What could this be about, wondered the heir to Ashmark. I would be very interested to know that. Soon, however, the rider left and went back to his horse. Tywin's squires, Jenna's sons Cleos and Lenal, left the pavilion and began running in all directions. More weasel than lion, in spite of their mother. How is it that they favor their father more than their mother? If Aemon were to die, it would be a service to all of House Lannister, and to his own children. Lenal ran to Tijet. Uncle Tijet. All are invited to Lord Tywin's pavilion at once, he said. Very well, Tijet replied with a nod. What in the seven hells was father thinking when he wed Jenna to Aemon Free? Inside Tywin's tent, Tywin stood by his table, where a map of the central kingdoms of Westeros was scrawled across. Stark and his army are in the Crown Lands, he said. Just as I suspected. Mocking Aerys by fighting in lands so close to the capital. What news is there of the Tyrell army, my lord? Asked cousin Stafford. At that question, Tywin frowned with a grimace. And yet, for a moment, Tijet could have sworn that his eldest brother looked amused, even if it was only briefly. What's this? Mace Tyrell and his army were routed at a place called Juniper Hall in Buckwell Lands, Tywin explained. Routed? I know that Mace Tyrell is a fat and flowery fool, but how in the seven hells could he lose to less than 30,000 Northerners with 65,000 Reachmen? Eddard Stark is far less green than all indications suggested to us, it would seem, said Geryon. That and more. The young wolf has won 3 great victories. And against armies larger than his own. And a victory such as this will be devastating to Aerys' reputation. What of his losses? How many men does he have now? Tijet asked. We do not know. However, he cannot have too many men, especially after fighting 3 great battles against much larger armies, Tywin replied. True. He can't have more than 20,000 men, if that. Then he will be outnumbered 2 to 1 and outmatched greatly when we come to fight them, my lord, stupidly said Harris Swyft. Tijet rolled his eyes at Kevan's good father. It is clear that we will outnumber the young wolf, my lords. However, we cannot allow ourselves to succumb to the dangers of arrogance. Tyrell fell victim to its poison, and he is now defeated and has lost over 30,000 men, Tywin said wisely. Where are the Northerners now? Asked Kevan. They are still in the Crown Lands. Recovering from their victory and gathering supplies. It is evident that they know that we are coming. And they will prepare for it. We will march within the hour for House Buckwell's lands and track down the Stark army and finally put an end to them. Elia 13. Elia was sat in the nursery with Lara, Miria and 2 nursemaids, called Sabitha and Maya, whom she had recently hired to care for her children when neither she could care for them. Rhaenys was playing around with Balerion and Lara. Whilst Elia and Miria were fussing over Visenya, whom was refusing to let go of her 2 beloved dolls, both of which were dragon dolls. Elia turned to see Maya and Sabitha both gently putting Egon to sleep by singing beautifully to him. He seems to like you both, Elia commented to the 2 low-born girls. They flushed at the praise given to them by Elia. Elia beamed at the 2 of them for singing him to sleep. You both sing so beautifully, she complimented. Thank you, princess, they said shyly. Elia turned to Visenya, whom was refusing to go to sleep, it seemed. Perhaps you could do the same for this little dragon? Elia asked sweetly. Miria gently placed Visenya in her cot whilst the 2 girls walked to their charge and began to sing to her. Elia's ears quipped when she heard an urgent knocking on the door. Enter, she said. She turned to see Sabaristan, recently recovered from fighting with Ned at the Battle of Autumnstead. My princess. It is the Queen. She is giving birth, he said breathlessly as though he had been running. Elia left the nursery and ran with him to Roller's chambers. Viserys was sat outside. He was sad at hearing his mother scream and cry. Are Pycelle and his apprentices in there now? She asked. They are, my princess, he replied. Elia sat beside Viserys. She was glad that he was spending more time with she and with Roller. When previously, Aerys was spending all of his spare time with Viserys, as though grooming him to be crown prince as opposed to Rhaegar. With influences such as Roller and I, he will not turn into a hateful Targaryen whom believes in Valyrian supremacy and in the doctrine of exceptionalism. Elia, why does mother scream so? Viserys asked sadly. How best to describe this? She is giving birth, Viserys. You will soon be a big brother, she said with a beaming smile. She reached for his hand and held it to comfort him. Viserys' sad frown turned into a smile at the news. But then it turned into a sad grimace when he heard the pained screams of Roller. This is not fair on mother. She is in pain. Viserys moaned. It is unfair, but it is all well worth it in the end, Elia replied as she affectionately rubbed his shoulder. Elia held on to him as she screamed once again. It's okay, Viserys. She is with Pycelle. He will help her, Elia whispered gently to him. Viserys calmed down and sat back down. You will be a good big brother, won't you? I will, Elia. I will be a good brother, he said with purpose. Suddenly, the screams began to cease slowly. Roller moaned and groaned in pain. And then, Elia heard the cries of a babe. She has done it. She has given birth. Come, Viserys, Elia said with a beaming smile. Sabaristan opened the door. Elia saw Pycelle examine Roller whilst one apprentice dampened her face with a wet cloth and another two apprentices held the newly born Targaryen in a towel and began to clean it as it wriggled and wept. Viserys jumped to hug his mother. Oh, Viserys, there you are. My sweet and dear boy, she said with a beaming smile and kissed his forehead. How are you, mother? He asked. I am fine. Especially to see you here now, she replied. Elia turned to Pycelle. How is she, Grand Maester? She asked. The Queen is well, my princess. As is the princess, he replied. Princess? I have a daughter, asked Roller with a beaming smile. You do, my queen. Pink cheeks and healthy, he replied before presenting her to Roller, Elia and Viserys. Oh. She is so beautiful, Roller moaned before Pycelle gently passed her to Roller. Your little sister, Viserys, Roller said before showing her to him. Viserys beamed as he looked down at her. And what will you call her, Roller? Elia asked. I think Daenerys, Roller replied before kissing her forehead. Daenerys cooed at the kiss. I think she likes that name. Don't you, Viserys? Asked Elia. Yes, she does, Viserys replied before Roller passed her to him. Viserys couldn't help but smile as he looked down at Daenerys. Should we show her to father? Asked Viserys. Elia grimaced slightly before speaking. I'm afraid we cannot, Viserys. Your father is very unwell. He needs to be treated still, Elia replied. Indeed, my prince. The king needs to be treated. If he were to do his work as king and care for his family, it would make him unwell again, Pycelle added. Viserys, why don't you go with Sabaristan to your lessons? Roller asked sweetly. Viserys passed Daenerys to Elia. As he left, Elia felt Roller hold her hand. Elia turned to face her. Thank you. For everything you have done, she replied. Elia lifted her hand to her lips and kissed it. I could never have left you in that monster's clutches. Ashura 11. 3 great victories. And still counting. Ned has become an incredible warrior. And one for all the South to fear. And once the war is over, every hostile southern house will think twice before ever making an enemy of the Starks of Winterfell. Aerys and Rhaegar must know that they have lost too many men and credibility at this stage. Even if they somehow emerged victorious, it would be at the cost of far more casualties than what Daeron the Young Dragon had suffered when he invaded Dorne over a century ago. The news that was being read from the war's front all came as a pleasant surprise to Ashura and to all of Winterfell. None could ever have foreseen that House Stark could accomplish against the array of many enemies and armies that Aes the Mad would muster against the might of the North. But in spite of all of their victories, at the crossroads, at Autumnstead and at Juniper Hall, Ashura wanted the war to end. And for Ned to be back home with her. In spite of being a werewolf and a terror for all the South to tremble, she yearned for his return. Especially now, in the later stages of her gestation. Her legs, feet and ankles were swollen to the extent that it hurt as she walked. And as she sat down, it hurt from the pains of her back. And when she could, she had trouble sleeping from feeling her child moving inside her. Nevertheless, she was grateful to Benjen and to Maester Wallers, in spite of the latter having a dislike for Dawn and for the Dornish people. Both Ned's younger brother and the Maester for Winterfell were always nearby. For as Maester Wallers had told her, she was in her 9th month of her gestation. Her child would soon be born. And yet, as much as she wanted Ned to be there, she knew he couldn't. Not when the war was ongoing. Though she was glad of the letters Ned would frequently send, sometimes daily and sometimes weekly. Ashura inhaled and exhaled as she stood on the balcony, overlooking the training yard of the Great Keep. Where Benjen was sparring under the instruction of Sir Roderick. Benjen was a fast and capable fighter. Not hard and strong like Brandon. And not endurable and skilled like Ned. My lady. You must keep indoors. There is a chill, she heard behind her. Ashura frowned as she walked back inside. I need the fresh air. I hate the thought of being trapped indoors all day. Lord Benjen. Sir Roderick. It is time for lunch, Maester Wallers called from the balcony before heading back inside and shutting the doors to the balcony. Maester Wallers walked with Ashura to the dining hall. Ashura frowned at how swollen her legs were as the two made their way to the dining hall. But as they neared the doors, she could hear the opening of the side doors. She glanced from the corner of her eye to see Sir Roderick and Benjen. Before she could even say a greeting, she felt it. She recognized the signs from being by Alia's side for when Rhaenys was born. And from when she was by Mother's side before she gave birth to Illyria. Ashura gasped and groaned as she felt her waters break. Oh, God, she muttered. Maester Waller's eyes opened wide when he saw her. Sir Roderick. Help her. It has started, he shouted. Sir Roderick ran to Ashura's side and began to rush her to her bedchambers. She lay down, struggling to breathe and screaming almost every moment. Especially as Maester Wallers and his apprentices arrived and began examining her and lifting her dress up. Ashura gripped onto the sides of her bed as she screamed. Maester Wallers was urging her to push whilst his two apprentices were damping her forehead with wet cloths. But Ashura could barely hear any of them over her own voice. She screamed for Ned, Mother and even for Father. For Aaron, for Arthur, for Illyria and for Elia. But none of them were there. It was only she, Maester Wallers, Sir Roderick and Maester Wallers' two hapless apprentices. Push, my lady. Push. You are almost there, loudly spake the Maester of Winterfell, trying to make himself heard. Ashura tried to push, only to scream as the pain hurt her more than any other pain she had endured in her life. Where is Ned? Why is he not here? Ashura prayed that the old gods would return Ned to her and to their soon-to-be-born child. But no prayer she made could be heard over her own screams and groans and the urging of both Maester Wallers and Sir Roderick. Ashura panted desperately for breath as she saw Maester Wallers look down with excitement. My lady, I see the head. You are almost there. Just push. Ashura screamed as she struggled to push. I can't, she screamed with tear-filled eyes. You can, my lady. Just one more push. Just once more, said Sir Roderick. Ashura gasped and pushed as hard as she could. She panted and exhaled as she tried to regain her breath. But as she looked up, she saw Maester Wallers hold a babe in his arms. My lady, it is a boy. A healthy young son, he said proudly. Ashura gasped as she heard him weep. My son, she gasped. Whilst his two apprentices cleaned and wrapped her son in towels, Maester Wallers closely examined Ashura and gave her water. My son. Bring me my son, Ashura demanded. Sir Roderick did as he was bid and the large and burly knight brought him to her. Ashura wept as she held him in her arms. She beamed at him as he was curled in her arms, looking up at her. She leant down and kissed his forehead. I'm right here, my beautiful little wolf cub. I'm right here, she whispered before kissing his forehead again. He is the most precious little wolf in the world, she thought before she saw him close his eyes in exhaustion. You are a father now, Ned. She looked up to see Benjen enter her bedchambers. Ashura, he said. Benjen. You are an uncle now, she said before holding him up. Benjen smiled when he saw his handsome nephew. Hello. Hello, he gently whispered to him. And what is the name of this handsome little wolf, he asked. Prydain, she replied. Prydain, he asked. It comes from the old tongue. It's the old tongue word for the north. I had told Ned that I didn't want our first son to be named Brandon or to follow a tradition of thousands of years of Stark men, she explained. Fair enough. What did Ned think of the name? He liked it. Said it was unique and would make him stand out amongst the many Starks of the past, she replied. Notes. Again, the Lannisters underestimate the Starks with their numbers and fighting prowess. R'hllor gives birth to Daenerys, and no longer suffers from Aes. And Ashura gives birth to Prydain. Chapter 72, A Third Victory. Summary. The Red Keep hears the news of the Battle of Juniper Hall. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Rhaegar 11. Sat on the Iron Throne and with Mother, Elia and Jon stood by his side, Rhaegar met with courtiers and listened to the pleas of visitors from small folk to noble lords. Until the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard approached Rhaegar. My prince, my great-nephew, Sagath Hightower, is here to see you. He says it is of the highest importance, he said. Bid him come at once, Rhaegar whispered in reply. As Sigurd returned to his post, Rhaegar sat up straightly, thinking about what this could mean. Garth Hightower must have been part of the Reach army under Mace Tyrell's command, marching to confront Eddard Stark and the Northern Army. My prince, my princess, my queen, Sagath of House Hightower has come from the army of Lord Mace of House Tyrell, announced the herald. Rhaegar nodded curtly and watched as the second son of Lytton Hightower approached the Iron Throne. At least that this isn't his brother. Rhaegar frowned at the last time he had seen Baelor Hightower. And he frowned as he remembered how he had humiliated him. How he had unhorsed him at Harrenhal. And how he had crowned Elia as his queen of love and beauty. Garth the Grey Steel Hightower bowed to Rhaegar and Elia. Obviously they must have emerged victorious. Though the pompous Tyrells will try and use this victory to gain a royal marriage from us. Tyrell's heir, Willers, can marry Daenerys. But never mine own children. They must marry each other, for the prophecy commands it. My prince, the treacherous Northern army defeated us at Juniper Hall. In spite of the courage and determination of the Reach army, we had suffered over 40,000 casualties in the fierce fighting, announced Garth Hightower. Rhaegar frowned at this news. How in the Seven Hells could the Tyrell army be defeated by these eternally damned Northerners? They have fought 3 great armies of the South, large enough to fill a battlefield. And yet they emerge victorious. This must come to an end. I will take the fight to them myself. It seems to me that only a dragon can put a stop to them. It took a dragon to unite these quarreling kingdoms. It took a dragon to conquer Dorne. It took a dragon to crush Dagon Greyjoy's insurrection. And now, it will be a dragon which shall end this northerner conflict. Whilst Rhaegar thought of what to say, he could hear the murmurs and gossiping from the courtiers and nobility gathered in the throne room. All talking of Eddard Stark, whom they referred to as the undefeated wolf, the northern menace and the young wolf. And saying how this was father's punishment from the gods to punish him for his breaking of guest right and murder of Rickard and Brandon Stark. I must put a stop to this gossip mongering. There is a war to fight. A minor war in the heartland of the Crown Lands. And the greatest war to come, from the north. This war must end with a Targaryen victory. Yes, that is how it must end. With House Targaryen's absolute control over the north. For only with my guiding hand ruling the north, can they hope to prepare to face the true enemy. For they will be the first to face the brunt of the fighting when the long night comes. Rhaegar stood from the Iron Throne. My lords and ladies, he called. Still some talked. Until they heard the loud and booming voice of the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Silence for the Prince Regent. The war which has already claimed the lives of tens of thousands of brave soldiers, knights and lords now threatens to claim more as the northern rebels and traitors continue to set foot in the Crown lands. But this will not be allowed to stand. I vow to you all that this shall all come to an end soon. For I have given orders for an army of the Stormlands to muster at the capital. They shall be here in 10 days. And upon their arrival, combined with an army of the Crown lands, we shall march on the Northerners and attack with both our righteous might and with the support of mighty Lord Tywin Lannister, Rhaegar announced. The audience all applauded his proclamation. And as the court session came to an end, Rhaegar turned to Jon, Elia and Mother. "How did that go?" he asked. "It went well. But, is this the right way, Rhaegar? Should we not try and make peace?" asked Mother. "We will, Mother. Once our armies unite and gather, we will march and offer a chance of parley before either side comes to blows," replied Rhaegar. "Good. This war has gone on too long. And I cannot bear it for more lives to be lost," said Mother. "Feelings shared by us all, my queen," said Jon. Whilst Mother left, Elia and Jon remained. "My prince." Rhaegar turned to Pycelle, waddling towards him with a letter in his hands. "This has just arrived. From Lord Tywin Lannister, my prince," he said. "Thank you, Grand Maester," said Rhaegar. He glanced at the seal of the Lord of Casterly Rock before he broke the seal. Rhaegar nodded as he quickly read and finished the letter. "Is that news from Tywin Lannister and his army?" asked Elia. "It is. He writes that his army is 5 days' march away from the Northern army. They are encamped near a keep called Spring Falls, but the Northerners remain in their camp," Rhaegar explained. Notes. Even with a battle so close to the capital, all Rhaegar can think about is his prophecies. And thinks that only with the North under direct rule of House Targaryen can the Northerners be prepared to face the army of the dead. As if they have never endured winters, the long night or the army of the dead before. Chapter 73, Spring Falls. Summary. The Starks face off against the Lannister army, soon after Rhaegar leaves the Red Keep. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Tijet 9. Tijet looked down onto the center of the battlefield, where all was empty of life. Only grass, weeds and flowers stood there. With no heavy footprints of men or horses. Nor standing men in armor. But beyond was the enemy. The Northern army, which had emerged victorious in 3 previous battles. Against armies of the Crown lands, the Riverlands, the Vale and the Reach. Only now, they shall face men of the West. Tijet looked amongst the Northern army. At the front, were many a hardened warrior. He saw numerous warriors whom had the look of men whom would never shy from battle or from killing enemies. And he saw whom could only be the young wolf. Eddard Stark. Whom wore steel plate and boiled leathers. With a leaping direwolf emblazoned on his cuirass. Wearing a helm shaped like a snarling wolf's head. And whom wielded Ice, the Stark great sword of Valyrian steel. Tywin has always sought after a replacement for Bright Raw. To bring back the glory of House Lannister. And so we shall. Once this battle is won, we can choose either between the Stark great sword Ice or the Mormont bastard sword, Longclaw. Perhaps even both. His thoughts of the future glory and prestige of House Lannister were interrupted by the foreboding and horrific sound of the Northern war horn. Just hearing it chilled Tijet to his bones. He could not say why, but just hearing it made him almost reluctant to fighting this foe. What is he doing? Geryon wondered. He attempts to trick us, said Kevan. No. He intends to send his cavalry to the flank to flank ours, Tywin realized. If so, what will we do? Asked Tijet. Tywin turned to him. Brother, take our best cavalry and rout them. Once you break them, we send in the infantry, supported by our cavalry on the flanks, and smash them once and for all, Tywin commanded with an authority befitting that of a lion. Tijet nodded as he unsheathed his sword. Now for glory. For battle. Knights of the West. On me. Tijet roared with pride. A force of 2,000 knights and cavalry followed after him. They charged towards them, where, just as Tywin predicted, the Northern cavalry were riding fast for them. Tijet was confused. He could count only 1,000 of them. Why so few? He looked at the Northern cavalry. There was a noticeable difference between each of them. The bulk were knights of White Harbor, no different than knights of the south with their armored horses and knights and lances. And then there were the swift and hardy cavalry of House Roswell, armed with spears, great swords and battle axes. At the last moment, the northern cavalry rode to their east, avoiding the Westerland's cavalry charge. At which they charged straight into volleys of arrows. Tivet quickly raised his shield. He grimaced as he saw his horse neigh as arrows bounced off of the armor plating which protected his head and body whilst 3 arrows struck Tivet's shield. And he turned as they stopped. Stopped, only for the northern cavalry to fall upon them, with lances, spears, swords and axes. Tivet struck his sword across at a Roswell man-at-arms. He eviscerated him across his chainmail and leathers, and fell from his horse. Tivet proceeded to stab another before he came to blows with a knight of White Harbor. Tivet dodged a thrust from the man's sword and parried the next swing of his sword with his shield. He pushed the sword aside and stabbed the man in his throat, protected only by his chainmail. He spat out blood before Tivet drew his sword from his throat and he fell from his horse's saddle. Retreat! Retreat! Tivet turned his head. He spotted a knight in black plate armor. He had just struck down a knight of House Brax and a knight of House Banefort. And yet something about him seemed to be familiar. Tivet just couldn't place it. But the northern cavalry began to retreat from the battle, as hundreds of them rode far from Tivet and his knights. He looked amongst his own men. Many were blooded and wounded. And many were also dead or badly wounded. Tivet looked up ahead. He saw Tywine give a command to his squires. And they blew furious notes from their war horns. Tivet nodded as the Westerland's army began to advance onto the northern army. You should have known better than to face the lions of the West, Stark. You may have emerged victorious in 3 great battles beforehand. Even against the idiot Tyrells. But this will show the strength of House Lannister to all the realm. And finally, end the farce of Aerys and free my nephew from being his hostage. Robert X. Come on, you pompous lion cunts. Robert heard Ned roar for all to hear. The advancing Lannister cavalry were joined by their blooded comrades, fresh from fighting the Blackfish and the supposedly retreating northern cavalry. They never learn. Robert frowned as he glanced at Ned. This war has turned Ned into a warrior unlike any other. He's not even a tried and tested knight, and yet he's slain hundreds of knights and warriors. He's slain Umril Celtigar and defeated Barristan fucking Selmy. But he's far from the Ned I once knew. The man whom I love as a brother. The fucking Targaryens did this to him. Aerys and Rhaegar both. Both cunts took mother and father from me. And they took Rickard and Brandon from Ned. Robert grinned as he watched as the enormous might of the Westerlands began to advance towards them. He held his hammer up and readied himself for the inevitable clashing of steel, flesh and bone. Our battle will be an incredible one. One which shall be talked of more so than ever before. To humble Tywine Lannister himself. The arrogant lion has thought himself above all others for a long time. Father talked all of the time of Tywine's arrogance in the small council. Our victory today will make him think again. Think again before daring to think himself above the Baratheons of Storm's End and the Starks of Winterfell. The charging infantry and cavalry began at a similar pace. Until the cavalry were well in front of the Lannister infantry. Until they were at least a mile ahead of the infantry, with the red cloaks of Lannisport in front. Just as Ned predicted. Spearmen. Ready. Ned commanded, lifting ice up high. The spearmen at the flanks began to press their shields together, ready for the inevitable clash. Spears. Ned shouted. They thrusted their spears in front. Archers. Knock. Robert glanced behind to see the archers knock arrows, all of which were flaming. Draw. Robert could hear as thousands of bowstrings were drawn back. Loose. Robert smirked as he looked in the sky at thousands of flaming arrows fired down on the approaching cavalry. Though flaming arrows made little difference against armor, it did frighten the horses whom charged across the field. And often the flames would catch onto the cloaks on knights, men and horses. And when it did strike at flesh, it did make greater difference. The cavalry charge stalled briefly as the horses panicked at the flames before archers fired more arrows. Advance. Ned commanded. They advanced 10 paces. And the spearmen, Robert saw, were soon to thrust with both spears and pikes. The cavalry advanced again. And now they came closer. Ned gave the long-awaited command. Pikes. The pikesmen thrust their pikes forth. Strike. Ned ordered. Pikes, spears and arrows felled many horses and men as they charged towards them. Fold the flanks. Fold the flanks. Ned ordered. And as the cavalry struggled against the supposed northern flanks, the true flanks came to light when the northern infantry, hidden from sight, commanded by the great Yonumber and Jorah and Mage Mormont, joined battle. The cavalry faltered as they were being pushed back. Now! Ned shouted. They charged at the cavalry from the center. Robert laughed as he struck down a knight with his hammer. The knight fell from his saddle, screaming. As he landed, Robert lifted his hammer up high. He struck down on his helm. His helm did little to save him, for his skull was obliterated by the striking of Robert's hammer. Robert turned when he heard the thundering hoof-steps of a huge war horse. He saw a large stallion, larger than he had ever seen any other ride. And riding the stallion was an enormity of a man. Wearing heavy black steel plate armor that looked so thick and strong that nothing could ever penetrate it, nor could any man move in it. And he wielded a great sword almost as large and wide as Ned's own eyes. And he wore a helm of black steel with a stone fist punching the sky on the roof of it. Robert knew well whom this knight was. He had seen him joust at Harrenhal. And he saw cousin Rorigan knight him. Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides. And knight of Clegane's keep. Fucking northern scum. I will fucking kill you all, shouted the charging mountain. Hardly the talk of a true knight, Robert thought with a grin before he swung his hammer hard at a nearby knight. The knight fell from his horse at Robert's hammer striking his breastplate. Robert turned to Clegane, whom had struck down a northern spearman whom had speared the chest of Clegane's stallion. A stallion which Clegane had little control over, it seemed. Clegane. You cunt. Come and face me, you fucking coward. Robert roared. Clegane turned to him. You puny little cunt, shouted the mountain that rides. Clegane charged straight towards Robert. Robert swung his hammer as hard as he could at the unprotected head of Clegane's enormous stallion. The horse did not scream as Robert's hammer connected with its brains. Clegane was thrown from the saddle and landed on his side. He grunted and cursed as he struggled to stand up again. Come on. Come on, you fucking lummox. Come and face a real man. Robert roared as he smashed his hammer against his own shield. Clegane finally stood up. He turned to Robert, throwing his shield aside. You fucking cunt. I'll rape your fucking corpse. Robert ducked underneath his clumsy and unskilled swing. He spotted Clegane's left leg, where the greave was coming loose as a result of landing on the ground. So, Robert responded by smashing his hammer against Clegane's left leg. Clegane screamed in fury as he struggled to remain standing straight. Robert continued by crashing his hammer down onto Clegane's pauldron. Robert smirked as he heard bones crack from the powerful blow as the black steel plate broke and the bones underneath felt the impact. Clegane swapped his sword into his other hand. He furiously thrusted his sword at Robert. Robert only parried the sword with his shield. Before he swung his hammer across at Clegane's helmeted head. Clegane fell on his back, screaming and grunting in pain. His broken beyond repair helm had fallen from his head. His jaw was broken from the hammer's impact. He struggled to breathe as he looked up at Robert. He cursed at Robert as he halted in front of him, and he lay helplessly on the ground. And Robert stood above him and lifted high his great hammer before he smashed it down onto the brute's head. Blood and brains splattered all over Robert's armor as the blow landed. Robert spat on his corpse before he had ripped his hammer away and then turning to his next opponent. He looked to see the cavalry were beginning to falter and rout from the battlefield. Just as the infantry were charging to join battle. Now comes the fun. And the slaughter, Robert thought. His grin widened when he saw Ned, whose sword and armor were drenched in blood, reach for his war horn. Elbereth 9. Elbereth smirked as he watched the Lannister cavalry crushed by the northern archers and infantry. And then the Lannister infantry crossed swords with the Stark infantry, whilst being shot down by northern archers. They did not know that there was more yet to come. Elbereth took his lance from Joffrey. He turned to the Blackfish. "How much longer, Sir Brynden?" Elbereth asked. The Blackfish kept his gaze fixed on the battlefield, whilst the northern cavalry began to form and take up lances from their squires. "Not much longer, Yonarin. It won't be long until Ned crushes their front lines and the flanks fold into them," said the Blackfish. He took up his own lance from his squire. Elbereth looked around at Joffrey and Kyle, both armed with lances and ready for battle. Since leaving the Eyrie for the war, Elbereth felt that he had finally fulfilled a boyhood dream. A dream where he was like a winged knight of old Vale legends, becoming a greater fighter than he had ever learned from lessons in the training yard in the Eyrie. Better with a lance and with a sword. This was his fourth battle. He had fought and killed many soldiers, of 5 kingdoms now. And he felt he was honoring his ancestors with every battle he fought. Which he fought in the name of honor and justice and to honor the memory of murdered friends. Elbereth smirked when he heard the long-awaited northern war horn. Ned's signal. The battle began with us crossing swords. And now it shall end with our smashing into their rear. Elbereth turned to the Blackfish. "Reform the lines. Prepare to charge," he commanded. Elbereth rode alongside he, Roose Bolton, Mark Riswell, Willis and Wendell Marndaly, Joffrey and Kyle. They rode further up a field until they were directly facing the rear of the Lannister infantry, already sucked into the battle. "Charge," roared Sir Brynden. Elbereth roared and shouted as he charged across the blooded fields. Until they came close to the rear. The Lannister infantry turned. Some tried to level spears. But it was too late. Elbereth's lance impaled 3 men before he threw it aside and drew his sword. He sliced across at a man-at-arms wielding a poleaxe. His sword cut at the man's throat. His axe fell from his hands before he fell to the ground, still clutching his bleeding neck. Elbereth stabbed a knight as he tried to escape the carnage. He caught sight of whom could only be a Lannister knight climb down from his fancifully decorated armored horse and face Ned. "The young wolf," he commented with a sarcastic tone as he removed his helm, revealing a head of golden hair like those of the Lannisters of Casterly Rock. Ned removed his own helm with one hand whilst stabbing a knight of House Crickehall. "And you are," he growled with a blooded face. "Sir Tyrett Lannister." Ned drew his sword from the corpse of the Crickehall. He swung his sword at Ned. Ned blocked it by holding up ice. The arrogant Lannister responded by swiftly swinging across at Ned's helm. Only for Ned to slice ice at Tyrett Lannister's cuirass. Lannister groaned as blood spilled from where Ned had cut him. Ned continued by kicking him down with a roar. He held ice up above him, ready to finish him off. Lannister pointed his own sword desperately at Ned. Only for a war horn to be heard from further afield. Elbereth looked to see the Lannisters waving a banner. The war horn sounded again. "Retreat! Retreat, fall back, get out of here, lads, we can't win here, and save yourselves, boys," was shouted across the Lannister troops. Elbereth laughed as they all began to retreat. "Let them go," Ned roared as he nodded to Tywin Lannister's brother. Lannister stood up and nodded to Ned with a begrudging, but pained expression. He turned and grabbed his horse and began to ride back. Elbereth cheered with the army as they celebrated the victory. Elbereth clapped hands and hugged Jon, Kyle, Joffrey, Robert and Ned when he met with them individually. 4 great victories. Now the Targaryens must be shitting themselves. Notes. And another victory for the Starks. But how will the Targaryens react when they find out? Chapter 74, Castle Stokeworth. Summary. In Castle Stokeworth, Rhaegar gets a letter. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Rhaegar 12. It is a good thing to be away from the Red Keep. There, all I can think of is father escaping and burning me for all Elia has done. But once this war has ended, all pretenses are gone. I will be king. And have all the power to do what must be done for the realm to face the great peril. Once the army Jon had mobilized had come from the Stormlands and arrived at King's Landing, they had combined the army with the remnants of the army which had failed at the Battle of Autumnstead. But Rhaegar was filled with confidence. The army at his command was of 30,000. An army which he knew would outnumber the Northerners by 5,000 men. And then there was the Lannister army. Fresh from the Westerlands, and numbering 50,000 men. With Tywin Lannister attacking from the west and him attacking from the east, he knew that Eddard Stark was all but defeated. But as he was sat down in Lord Stokeworth's feasting hall, Rhaegar thought of how this war started. It started because of father's paranoia with the Triarchy. They shouldn't be a problem. So long as we maintain peaceful relations, then there needn't be reason for conflict, in spite of ill history in the past. Rhaegar glanced at Elia. He was glad that she had come. He knew that she was a calming presence for all whom met her. And he was certain that she would be the best at negotiating with the Northerners. Rhaegar didn't want battle. He wanted for there to be peace. Especially when the true enemy emerged from hibernation. And invaded the north. The north would be the first to invaded from the armies of undead. And the north would be destroyed if the battle-hardened armies of House Stark were vanquished by his sword and the sword of Tywin Lannister. And so, that was why he waited at Castle Stokeworth. Sat in Lord Stokeworth's feasting hall, Rhaegar spoke with Elia, Jon, Miles, Richard, Arthur and Oswell. "Have we received any word from Tywin Lannister?" asked Rhaegar. "No ravens have arrived, my prince," replied Maester Frenken of Castle Stokeworth. "Why not?" After he took his leave only Elia was quiet whilst the others all tried speaking on what Rhaegar had to do. "Quiet. Quiet. All of you," Rhaegar commanded. This time, they held their tongues. "Jon," said Rhaegar, gesturing for him to speak. "Rhaegar, I can only surmise that either Lord Tywin has defeated Eddard Stark or he is waiting for instructions from us," replied Jon. "Perhaps. And yet why has he not replied to any ravens we have sent him? Or sent any of his own?" asked Miles. "I agree. Something is wrong," added Arthur. The hall's doors opened. Lord Tamard Stokeworth entered, and he was not alone. Beside him was clearly a Northerner. He was young and with long and dark hair and wore armor of steel, chainmail and boiled leathers. And wore a cloak bearing the sigil of the minor house of House Castle. "My prince, this man says he is a messenger from the Stark army." Rhaegar forgot all of what he and his inner circle had said as he faced the Stark messenger. "I am Jory of House Castle, my prince," he said as he bowed his head to him. "Leave us, Lord Stokeworth." As he left, Rhaegar faced Jory Castle. "What message do you bring from Eddard Stark?" asked Elia. He reached for his pocket. Arthur and Oswell both reached for their swords. "Don't you think I was already searched by Lord Stokeworth's guards?" Moran's Castle commented with a raised brow. Rhaegar ignored his embarrassed friends as he drew a sealed letter from his pocket. Oswell snatched the letter from his hands, annoyed by his arrogant comment. Rhaegar took the letter and examined the seal. It was indeed the seal of the Lords of Winterfell. He broke the seal and read the letter. "To Rhaegar Targaryen. I care not for false pleasantries or pathetic flatteries. For, as always, winter is coming. You seek to end this war, and so do I. Tell my messenger where you would have us meet and we shall be there. I and my army have already fought in great battles and won great victories. All in the name of justice for House Stark and retribution for the North. Eddard Stark." Rhaegar pursed his lips before passing the letter to Jon, whom read it aloud for the rest to hear. "Then this is it. He knows that with the Lannisters closing in and my army ready to join this war, that his days are finished in the Crown Lands. And all without needing to raise another sword." Rhaegar turned to his inner circle. "What say you?" They all agreed that this was the best approach. Rhaegar turned back to Jory Castle. "Return to Eddard Stark. Tell him to come to our encampment with only his closest bannermen and we shall negotiate this war's end peacefully." He raised a brow at that. "Peacefully? My prince, my lord Ricard was invited to your capital under false pretenses," he said. "You will not speak to your prince in such a manner." Jon snapped at the impertinent Northerner. "But it is the truth, is it not? He will not be content with your assurances, when your house has proven itself anything but trustworthy in recent history," he said with crossed arms. Rhaegar snarled. He was angry that there was truth in his words. "You have my word that there will be no breaking of promises. I intend to end this war peacefully. I swear on the lives of my children," Rhaegar said with conviction. He seemed satisfied at that. Castle turned and left, followed by 2 household guards of House Stokeworth. Impertinent northerner savage, Richard commented. I hardly think the northerners to be savage, Elia added. Princess Elia, you heard his words, Miles said. I did. And yet I know that the northerners despise false flatteries and get straight to the point of the matter. And I hardly think the northerners to be savages when one considers all that Eddard Stark has done. I know him to be a good man and a man of honor. One whom was forced into this war unwillingly, Elia said. Roriger nodded at the reminder. He had only met Eddard Stark once. At Harrenhal, when he had first gone to see Elia at the news that she was heavy with child once again. When Roriger remembered that day, he could not imagine that the Eddard Stark that day was the terror that was crushing armies larger than his own in the Riverlands and the Crown Lands. And whom had slain many a great knight. And had even defeated Sir Barristan himself. She's right. Whether treacherous or not, Eddard Stark's cause is just. And that is why we shall end this war peacefully. But in a way that House Targaryen shall benefit the most. The Starks will retain Winterfell and their lordship of the north. But it is from this war, that House Targaryen shall retain absolute dominion over the north, Roriger announced. Notes. At Castle Stokeworth, they have had no letters from Tywin Lannister, nor has he replied to any letters from them. Chapter 75, The Treaty of Stokeworth. Summary. Ned and Roriger meet properly at Castle Stokeworth, but still there is no news from the Lannisters. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Elia 14. In the pavilion on the outskirts of Castle Stokeworth, Elia was sat down with Roriger, Jon, Miles and Richard. Elia turned her gaze to the tent's flap when she could hear the hoofbeats of numerous horses. Not quick and graceful horses like the sand steeds of Dawn as she had grown up riding and that Oberyn had great interest in. No, these were the hoofbeats of tall, muscular and hardy northern horses. Arthur entered the pavilion. They are here, my prince, he said. Roriger nodded. Has there still been no message from Tywin Lannister? Asked Elia. There has not, my princess, he replied. Something is wrong, Elia thought as she heard the men talking at the same time as slowed horses trotting. But what is wrong? Why does this appear to be so easy? Elia watched as Roriger sat up straight whilst she could hear them dismount from the horses. As well as the unsheathing of steel and the piercing of swords into soil. And then Elia watched as Ned entered the pavilion. Followed by 5 men. A huge man with a long and unkempt beard and equally unkempt hair, wearing the sigil of House Umber on his cloak. A brawny and robust man with battle scars in his face and hands and the white sun of House Karstark on his tunic. A pale and frightening man with carefully trimmed hair and cold and calculating eyes as he wore a badge of a flayed man on his tunic. A young, scarred and beaded man with arms and legs thick with muscle and wearing a dark green cloak with a large black bear emblazoned on it. Finally a large man, large with fat and muscle, following after them, wearing a pin and a cloak declared with the merman sigil of House Marndale. Jon Umber, Lord of Last Hearth. Rickard Karstark, Lord of Carhold. Roose Bolton, Lord of the Dread Fort. Jorah Mormont, Lord of Bear Island. And Willis Marndale, heir to White Harbour. You stand in the presence of Roriger of House Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, Crown Prince and Prince Regent to His Grace, Aes, second of his name, King of the Andals, the Roiner and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, pompously said a herald. And yet, he was seemingly ignored by the Northerners. Are we not going to be offered bread and salt? Asked Ned. The meaning behind his words was clear. It is obvious he doesn't trust us. After what happened to his father and brother under the false pretenses they had been invited to King's Landing under. Elia glanced at Roriger. He hadn't been expecting this. You have come at the Crown Prince's invitation to end this conflict and once again to submit to House Targaryen. You are in no position to make demands of your future king, arrogantly said Jon. But Elia frowned at Jon's arrogance. She turned to Arthur. She promptly nodded. He quickly left. Elia hoped that he had understood her meaning. She smiled when Arthur swiftly returned with a servant whom presented bread and salt to the Northerners. Both Arthur and the servant left when the Northerners, seemingly satisfied, sat down on the chairs offered to them. Whilst Roriger began, as soon as the last Northerner had sat on his seat. As Lord Connington had said, you were invited. So let us speak on what is to be done to end this conflict which has already ended the lives of tens of thousands of people, diplomatically said Elia. Elia turned to Roriga, while the northerners took wine and refreshments from servants offering them. Elia turned to Ned, whom had changed since last she had seen him. When last she saw of him, in Harrenhal, he was shy, sweet and gentle. But when he was in the presence of Ash, he looked as though he was the happiest man in the world. Whereas now, he was an enigma to Elia. There was something about him that she couldn't quite see. You have fought with great courage, Lord Stark. Certainly with courage, skill and tenacity that none could have foreseen from you or from the undefeated Northern Army. Indeed, Sir Barristan had spoken highly of your fighting prowess at Autumnstead and your honor in allowing the defeated to fall back peacefully. But this war now comes to an end, and with I as the victor, Roriga said with a voice laced with arrogance. And just how is that possible, my prince? You have no victory, asked the frightening Roose Bolton, whom spoke quietly. And his eerily quiet voice was so quiet, that as much as Elia had wanted to ask him to repeat himself for clarity, she shivered at the thought of doing so. Especially when she regarded the sigil of his house. True, however, I have 30,000 men here. And further west is the Lannister army of 50,000. Combined, attacking on both sides, would be 80,000, and we outnumber you, 3 to 1 or 4 to 1. Your good fortune has run dry, Lord Bolton. But as Elia turned to the northerners, she was surprised by how calm and quiet they were. Not one of them showed any fear nor anger. They remained calm, sitting, drinking and eating whilst Roriga spoke. Again, Elia felt uneasy as she faced them. What do you offer, my prince? Asked the hardy lord of Bear Island. At that, Roriga cleared his throat and clapped his hands together with the pomposity of a man whom had all the power in the realm. I understand that you are a father now, Lord Stark, to a son called Prydain. Elia felt guilty at the mere mention of this. Of being forced to use the son of Ned and Ash for the guarantee of peace. And now, she saw a reaction on Ned's face. Though it seemed he was trying to keep control of himself, his brows were raised in anger. And his eyes were narrowed at Roriga. Elia shivered at looking into Ned's eyes. For a moment, she thought that his eyes, as dark as stone, turned as red as hellfire, as though looking the stranger in the eyes directly. As Ned silently glared, Roriga's counsel, Elia noticed, were as frightened as she. But Roriga, as always when speaking eloquently, was in his own world as his hands made gestures and he looked around with pomposity before he picked up a parchment that he and Jon had written the night before. From each northern house, you will surrender a son. Or a daughter if there is no son. They shall be treated honorably and fairly in the Red Keep and given high places in the king's court. So long as their fathers commit no new treasons. And for the next 10 years, all northern houses shall pay double taxes to the Iron Throne. All Valyrian steel swords owned by northern houses shall be surrendered to House Targaryen, in perpetuity. And your father's great and now completed project, the Kalin Canal, shall fall entirely under the direction of House Targaryen. As Roriga finished reading his conditions, he looked back up at Ned, whom had since calmed down, and was glancing at Roriga, Jon, Richard and Miles. Jon chose this moment to add to the negotiations. These terms are non-negotiable. And are the best you can get. Especially when the Crown Prince has generously permitted for your houses to retain your family seats and the guarantee that no traitors to the Iron Throne will be executed or exiled. Elia felt surprised that the Northerners made no visible reaction to these steep and dangerous terms. But she was distracted when Ned suddenly turned his head to the tent door. His head remained fixed there, until Elia heard the hastened gallop of a lone horse. Eddard 15. Right on time, Eddard thought as he heard the galloping ride of the Lannister messenger. Roose Bolton's plan worked perfectly. And now, all we must do is let the Lannister messenger to deliver the news and then we might finally capitalize on it. And let all the South tremble at the sight of the banners of the North and of House Stark from this day forth. For ever since Tywin Lannister's defeat at Spring Falls and the routing of the Lannister army from the blooded fields, it was by the suggestion of the Lord of the Dread Fort to trick Roriga into lowering his guard and allowing them to gain control of the negotiations. And how Landreed and his Crannock men had shot down all ravens between Tywin Lannister and Roriga before the former would send a messenger. I must speak to the Crown Prince, insisted the messenger. The Crown Prince is preoccupied with more important matters. You must wait until such matters have reached their conclusion, sir, sternly said Arthur. I have been directed to bring most urgent news from my Lord Lannister, sir, replied the messenger. Eddard turned to face Roriger, whom looked confused at first. You may want to hear his news first, thought Eddard. Roriger now tried to appear confident in front of them, as though the news the messenger would bring would only confirm what he thought he knew. Let the Lannister messenger pass, Sir Arthur, Roriger ordered with confidence and grace. The Lannister messenger entered the pavilion, wearing a cloak with the sigil of House Lannister and with golden hair and emerald green eyes befitting that of a family member of House Lannister. My prince, I am Sir Damien of House Lannister. I come from Lord Tywine to tell of our defeat at Spring Falls. Eddard grinned at watching Roriger squirm and panic as he contemplated what he had just heard. Defeat, he asked in disbelief. Yes, my prince, he replied with a nod. Only to shudder and yelp as he finally noticed Eddard and his bannerman. Where is Lord Lannister now, Sir Damien? Asked Robert's hated rival, Jon Connington. He marches back to the Westerlands, my lord. With what is left of our army, when it became clear that you had not received my lord's letters, he had made the decision to return to the Golden Tooth with less than half of our remaining numbers ready for battle. Eddard's smirk turned into a small wolfish grin as he faced Roriger. Damien Lannister was escorted away whilst Roriger was nervously speaking with his council, whom were just as shocked as he was. He turned to his bannermen, all of whom were smirking at this turn of events. Even Roose Bolton was smiling a frightening sneer. Now, he whispered. Now, Lord Stark, replied Roose Bolton with a nod. Eddard stood up. We have heard your offer. Just as you have heard of our great victory at Spring Falls. Our fourth. We have 23,000 battle-hardened fighting men of the North, all ready for a fifth great victory against your army of a paltry 30,000. Now I say paltry, for we have won victories against armies of 35,000, 40,000, 65,000 and now against Tywine Lannister's 50,000. All at the cost of 5,000 Northerners. I am prepared to give you a chance to offer better terms than your previous ones. If not, we will return to our camp and march for Stokeworth. We will leave once we have finished our drinking outside, though be advised, we drink fast. Sir Willis was the second to stand up. He reached for the so-called treaty in Roriger's hands and snatched it. Before any of the Southerners could even protest to this, the heir to White Harbor scrunched the parchment before putting it into the nearby brazier with a small fire roaring. Eddard walked to the pavilion door, followed by his bannerman. He made one final glance at Roriger. The plan worked better than I could have anticipated. For Roriger and his lickspittles were panicking and whose faces were awash with fear. What do we do? Roriger whispered. We can still defeat them, Roriger stupidly said Connington. If he could defeat the Lannisters and Tyrells, no single army can possibly withstand him, panicked Miles Mouton. It'll take weeks to organize more reinforcements to come. And if we retreated, they would chase after us all the way to the capital, added Richard Lunmouth. Wait. Eddard paused and turned around to face Elia. Roriger and his lickspittles turned to Elia in confusion. My princess, asked Eddard as he walked back to his seat. What is it that the North wants for the sake of peace and renewed fealty to the Iron Throne, she asked. Eddard was glad that he and his bannermen had planned what it was that they wanted from them in this negotiation. Now they had a chance to strengthen the North with such strength that they would never have seen possible in years past. And to such extent that never again would the South dare to belittle or mock the North ever again. Foremost, a pardon for all whom fought under House Stark's banner and in the name of our cause. Second, the remains of my father and brother. Third, for history to remember the truth of what happened in the Red Keep, that they were invited under false pretenses and were murdered without trial, as opposed to being justly executed for treason. Fourth, heirs is to be given to us, alive. And lastly, for concessions for the North for all insults and provocations towards House Stark and the North which we have suffered since Torrhen Stark bent the knee. Before either Roriger or his lickspittles could speak, Elia replied. Of what do you speak? She asked. Where to start? The list goes on. For all the insults House Targaryen and the South have made towards the North. In spite of the loyalty House Stark has shown from Torrhen Stark to father. I speak of how good Queen Alysanne stole our lands in the gift and gave them without compensation to the Night's Watch. Cregan Stark won the Dance of the Dragons for the Blacks, and yet House Targaryen did not reward him nor honor the Pact of Ice and Fire. His son died fighting for the young dragon in Dawn, and yet was looked down on by the same king and by Baelor the Blessed, whom plotted to invade the north, all because we did not share your cruel and destructive faith. No Targaryen prince, king or queen has set foot in Winterfell or the north for over a century. So tell me, princess, with all of this in mind, do you think that House Stark and the North are honored, appreciated or respected by House Targaryen or by the South? Confronted with this history lesson on the North, the Southerners frowned or grimaced at this. Rhaegar gulped at how he had sorely underestimated them. And Elia looked embarrassed by how they had looked down on the North and on House Stark. What fools they have let themselves become. House Stark rules the largest of the 7 kingdoms. The Northerners are hardened every day by the winters we endure, in a climate where only the strong survive. Whereas these Southerners live comfortably in beautiful, fair and fertile places. And do not have to endure cruel and unforgiving winters as we do. With that viewpoint, no. And it is evident that House Stark will be admired for all that you have accomplished in this war, Lord Stark, she said diplomatically. I care not for admiration. I care for the North and for House Stark, both taken advantage of and looked down on by the South and by our own kings. One of the reasons I fought was so that all enemies of House Stark will regret forever for daring to antagonize me and mine, he said before he turned his steely gaze to her husband, whom shuddered as their eyes met. Which only begs the question, my prince, what is to be done to guarantee peace and that the North is compensated for all grievances and insults directed to the North? Roose Bolton asked with an icy glare towards Rhaegar. You have no right to make demands, unwisely snapped Richard Longmouth. And yet, you are in no position to make any threats towards us, sir. For your inexperienced army, made up of maidens on the battlefield, stand little chance against our army, hardened after 4 great victories against overwhelming odds, said Jorah Mormont. Myself and my council shall discuss what terms we shall offer, in view of this new development, Rhaegar said with what little authority in his voice. But Eddard was not fooled. He could smell the despicable stench of deception and the delicious scent of fear emanating from him. And he could hear his heart beating. Did you not hear what Lord Stark said to you, my prince? We decide what ends this war, not you. You have not emerged victorious in this war as Aegon the Unlikely won against Lenal Baratheon, snapped the great Yonumber. We can still call for more armies to come to our call quickly, said Miles Mouton, unsuccessfully trying to sound intimidating. And how long would it take for said armies to mobilize and come to your aid? Or to defend King's Landing? That fancy red castle? Or the ugly iron chair, boomed the Ricard Karstark. Quiet. All turned to Elia at her demand for silence. Eddard raised his hand to his bannerman. Speak your terms, my princess, Eddard said with a gesture of his hand. Rhaegar frowned that Eddard's attention was turned to Elia and not to him. House Stark and the North shall be compensated. You have my word, my lords of the North, she offered. With what, princess? Asked the great Jon. You will have your pardons, the remains of Lord Ricard and Brandon, heirs shall be sent to Winterfell. The lands of the gift shall be returned. House Stark will be paid a ransom of 2 million gold dragons and the North shall receive a permanent tax reduction of 10%, just as Dawn does. Eddard smiled with a nod. He turned to his bannerman. A fine offer, my lord. I would accept, whispered Roose Bolton. The rest all agreed. If only it were that easy. We shall discuss what terms will be offered to the North quickly, said Rhaegar, trying to regain the initiative. The North will not settle for anything less than this, my prince, snapped Eddard. He stood up and glared down at Rhaegar. You will have our oaths of allegiance to you as king once my sword claims your father's head, and that these terms are honored, if House Targaryen has any of said qualities. So, unless you have anything further to offer, the renewed treaty will be written, signed and sealed, Eddard stated with a cold and hard voice. Or we will give you a war you will not believe. Notes. So, to explain that, by shooting down all ravens between Rhaegar and Tywine, the Starks could deliver the news of their victory against Tywine to a very surprised Rhaegar. Which would take away all advantages Rhaegar thought he had in the negotiations and make he and his inner circle panic. And they would be forced to grant pardons, a favorable peace and numerous concessions to the Northerners. Chapter 76, A Great Victory. Summary. Ashura receives news from the war from Ned. And Brynden and Elbert both return to their respective homes. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Ashura 12. Are you going to take your eyes away from him? Ashura beamed as she stared down at him, fast asleep in his cradle, having just been fed by Ashura. She didn't turn to Prydane's uncle, stood behind her. How can I not, she asked. For so many years, I thought I might never wed. Nor have children. That I would remain a tutor to Aaron's future children or as lady-in-waiting to Elia in King's Landing. But now I am a wife and a mother. I have a beautiful baby boy. One whom will one day rule Winterfell and the North. Both of which shall be stronger and more powerful than any of his forefathers had ruled in their days. My little wolf, Prydane. My lady. Lord Benjen. They turned around to Maester Wallace. He held a letter in his hand. Ashura couldn't see the seal. My lady, a raven has just come from Lord Eddard, he said. Hearing those words had never felt as wonderful to Ashura's ears. Ashura turned back to Prydane. She leant down and gently kissed his forehead. She stood straight once again and turned back to Maester Wallace. He passed her the sealed letter. He walked with she and Benjen as she broke the seal. Praise the old gods, she thought when she recognized the handwriting of Ned. My beloved Ash. We have emerged as the victors from this war. We return home now. We return having successfully negotiated a perfect peace with Rhaegar. After our great victory at Spring Falls, under Roose Bolton's advisement, we had tricked Rhaegar by having Howland and his Crannog men to shoot down all ravens flying from Tywin Lannister or from Rhaegar, to prevent Rhaegar from finding out about our victory. Then we met him, full of arrogance that he had won the war already. Until he learnt of Tywin's defeat at our hands from a Lannister messenger. Surprised and shocked, Rhaegar, John Connington, Miles Mouton and Richard Lunmouth had no idea of what to do and were panicking. Until good Elia seized the initiative and made a greater offer than one we could have ever imagined. We have been pardoned for the war and we shall not only get the remains of Brandon and father, but also Aes, alive. As well as Elia's own offers. Including a ransom of 2 million gold dragons, a 10% tax reduction and the return of the lands of the gift to Winterfell. As I stated before, we are returning home. Exhausted, but victorious and proud. Though with losses of 5,000 northern fighting men. I long to see you, my love. You and our son Prydane. A good name, my bannermen have decided. As do I. I love you so much, Ash. Your Ned. Ashura beamed as she finished reading the letter. She passed the letter to Benjen as she daydreamed of Ned returning to Winterfell. And falling in her arms. And him meeting Prydane for the first time. That was a brilliant plan, said Benjen. What? Asked Ashura. To trick Rhaegar, so Benjen replied. Yes, indeed. I am just glad that we have Roose Bolton answering to Winterfell, Ashura commented. This great victory means everything for the North, said Maester Wallace. Why is that? Asked Ashura. My lady, with this, the North gains far greater standing amongst the kingdoms of Westeros. Not only will our income and treasuries be far larger, but for Lord Stark's humbling of the Tyrells, the Lannisters and even the mighty Targaryens, all will fear and respect the North forever, he explained. Never again will the South mock or look down on the North. With the Kalin Canal and all that father built, that makes our incomes great, true. But what Ned has done, all will recognize our strength and consider the North as a great power, and never again will any think to try and make an enemy of House Stark, said Benjen. Brynden 7. Brynden rode alone into Riverrun. He smiled as he looked around at the familiar sights of home. From the walls to the marketplace. From the stables to the town square. And from the fishery to Geron's bakery, one of Brynden's favorite places in Riverrun. Brynden returned on his horse, but wearing only traveling leathers and chainmail underneath it. He smiled at returning home. Knowing that he had done it. He had done his part in protecting House Tully and keeping his family safe. He rode to the Great Hall, where at the courtyard, he saw Petter, Edmure, Cat and Lysa all stood there. And stood behind them was Hoster. He smiled at seeing his nephew, his nieces and his brother. at returning home from fighting 4 great battles. "Welcome home, brother," said Hoster. Brindon climbed down from his horse. He chuckled as he hugged Edmure, Cat and Lysa. Before he hugged Hoster. "Ah, it is fantastic to be back home," brother Brindon replied. As Hoster's children and his ward left to their lessons, Brindon walked with Hoster to his solar. Upon arriving, Hoster sat down and Brindon sat down opposite him, exhausted. Exhausted from riding from the Crown Lands to Riverrun. But also exhausted from fighting the war and the many great battles. We all eagerly heard the reports from messengers and merchants of the battles. At the crossroads, Autumnstead, Juniper Hall and Spring Falls. All such incredible tales. Each one more extraordinary than the last. And all achieved by a single northern army, Hoster commented. That and more. They had me helping. But, I was only too glad to help them, Brindon commented. Indeed. If only we could have done more, Hoster replied. Let us not dwell on that, brother Brindon said. No. Quite right. But still, what a war that must have been, Hoster commented as Brindon yawned. Yes, though with results that none could have seen coming, Brindon replied as Hoster poured a wine cup for himself and for Brindon. Yes, brother. The North has become a power that none could have foreseen, Hoster said with a sad frown. And that dampens your spirits, asked Brindon as he took hold of his wine cup. It does, when I wish that Ricard could have been alive to have seen this. To have seen his son do what he has done. And accomplish all that he has done. We all do. And yet, Aerys shall be the one to suffer for it, Brindon replied with a chuckle. He will. Why? Asked Hoster. One of the conditions for peace was for Roriger to hand Aerys to Winterfell. Alive. Hoster stared in shock at what he had just said. Before he burst out laughing. Gods. Truly, he asked. At Brindon's nod, Hoster laughed again. Oh, by the 7 gods, I wish I could be there in Winterfell to see his head freed from his neck, Hoster said with a hearty chuckle. You and me both, Brindon replied before raising his cup. To an alliance between the North and the Riverlands. Hoster nodded with a smirk before joining the toast and drinking together. What happens with Cat now, Hoster? Brindon asked. Hoster grimaced at that. Well, Eddard Stark is already wed. Happily wed to a Sheridan, from what I know, he said. Indeed, he would write letters to her each and every day, Brindon commented. Which leaves the question, whom will Cat wed? Hoster wondered. The Tyrells. Brindon suggested. Hoster shook his head. No. Willers Tyrell is too young. A boy of 5 or 6, the last I heard of the arrogant and flowery Tyrells of Highgarden, he explained. But then, Brindon realized something. What of the Lannisters? Hoster turned to him. Whom is heir to Casterly Rock? Brindon asked. I know not. Whilst Tywin's favourite son is in the Kingsguard, legally it should be his dwarf son. Though Tywin has no love for him and wishes for Jaime to be back as his heir, Hoster said. Tywin Lannister will not allow this, though, said Brindon. What do you mean? Asked Hoster. Well, think about it. Now that Aerys' fate is all but confirmed to be death from Ned's sword, Roriger will be king. Tywin will do whatever he can to have him release young Jaime Lannister from the Kingsguard. We were both there when Aerys put him in the Kingsguard. He looked more like a boy too scared to do otherwise than a man proud and ready to adorn the White Cloak. Hoster nodded at that. He will offer gold and help to Roriger to rule his realm for Jaime to be released from the Kingsguard and return to be his heir, Hoster said. And when he does return, said Brindon. We will offer Cat as a bride to the heir to Casterly Rock, newly returned home, Hoster finished with a smile. Elbereth X. Elbereth stared in disbelief at the sight stood before him. He reached down and took hold of his waterskin. He thirstily drank from it before resuming his gaze whilst Joffrey was constantly hugging his furs. Thank the 7, he thought before continuing his walk. As he stepped on the paved and carven stone steps, he smiled when he reached closer. Having been away from home for so long. Fighting in 4 great battles. Fighting in a war in which thousands died. And at times thinking he might never see it again. At long last, Elbereth was home. Home. I am home, At last, Elbert thought with disbelief as he walked towards the crescent chamber, tightly hugging the furs around his shoulders. Elbert smiled as the two guards opened the doors. "Thank you," he said to them. He had already said his goodbyes to Yon and to Kyle when they had separated at the gates of the moon. After the adventures that they had had, the battles in which they fought, the war in which humiliated the Targaryens for their arrogance, Elbert saw the roaring fireplace. Like a falcon spotting its prey from high in its nest, Elbert swooped towards the fireplace and eagerly sat down. Joffrey moaned as he rubbed his hands together, feeling the heat of the roaring flames. "Elbert." Elbert stood and turned. He smiled when he saw him. "Uncle John," dressed in clothes of sky blue and pearl white. "Uncle," said Elbert. He walked towards him. Uncle John held his arms out. And the two held a long and warm embrace. "Thank the gods you are returned," said Uncle John warmly with a chuckle. Elbert broke from the hug. "Indeed. And Aes pays for his cruelty and arrogance," Elbert added. "So I heard. Justice for both Brandon and Ricard. And our friends in the north grow ever stronger because of it," said Uncle John. Elbert then turned to Joffrey, a boy whom had served him faithfully in the war, and had loyally stood by his side when he chose to go and fight in a war which did not involve or threaten him or his noble house. For that, there was only one reward for which Elbert could reward him. "Joffrey, come." Joffrey walked from the fireplace and to Elbert's side. "Kneel," said Elbert. Joffrey looked confused as he fell to his knees. Elbert drew his sword. "Joffrey of House Crane. In the name of the warrior, I charge you to be brave. In the name of the father, I charge you to be just. In the name of the mother, I charge you to defend the young and the innocent. In the name of the maiden, I charge you to defend all women. Arise, Joffrey of House Crane, Knight of the Seven Kingdoms." Joffrey gasped as he realized what this all meant. He arose from where he knelt. Elbert smiled as he shook his hand, followed by Uncle John. "Congratulations, Sir Joffrey," said Uncle John before he patted Joffrey's shoulder. "But, my lord," he said, "you have served me faithfully and well, these past many weeks and moons, Joffrey. You chose to fight alongside me in a war you were not involved in. One in which your house and family were not threatened. You deserve a knighthood more than many men I have met in my life, even ones with noble and royal blood. And if you tell anyone I said this, I shall never ever deny it." Joffrey flushed with pride at Elbert's speech. "Well said. And he speaks true, young Crane. There are many men across the realm whom are knights. Men with noble blood and yet no noble deeds to their name. It is young men like you whom do good deeds because it is right and never for the gold or glory attached to them. That is what makes a man noble. Merely by doing these, you remind people that there will always be good men of honor in the world," wisely said Uncle John. "Now, come both of you. You both must be starving from your journey home," Uncle John said with a pleasant smile. They followed after him to the nearby hall, a small dining hall where guests were offered food and drink after making the long trek to the Crescent Chamber and to the Eyrie. Elbert could hear his stomach rumble at the thought. Notes. As well as returning home, now Brynden and Hoster make a plan for Catelyn's future now that there is only one possible candidate amongst the Lords Paramount for her to marry. Chapter 77, The Mighty Storm Lord. Summary. Robert returns home to his family, as well as his family from abroad. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Robert the 11th. Robert could see the towering and great height of his home from over a mile away. But he refused to stop, to pause for breath, to take a moment for food or drink. He refused to halt until he could see it. He beamed when at last he saw it. Both he and Artyom looked ahead from a hill on the outskirts. A hill in which he had a view of the towering heights of his home. The sight of which filled Robert with a longing he had not felt since he had completed his wardship at the Eyrie. Storm's End. Home. And Lyanna is there. She is safe. And the war is over. Robert felt nothing but bliss as he laid eyes on the towering round hall and the great fortress of Storm's End. A fortress which stood the test of strength of two gods in old legends. The fortress which could not be broken by dragons in Aegon's conquest. and dragons could not conquer it in the Dance of Dragons. This has never felt so wonderful, Robert commented. To be coming home, my lord? Asked Artyom. Yes. But not merely that. To see home after fighting a war. A war in which I fought in 4 battles, killing hundreds of men and knights, Robert explained as he took a swig of his water skin. It was sad to leave home. But that doesn't matter anymore. I come home a proven warrior. And one worthy of reputation of the great Baratheon stormlords before me. I always knew that I would enjoy the thrill of battle. The ecstasy of war. The chaos of fighting enemy after enemy. The delight of victory. And the excitement of never knowing if each moment would be your last. Or if the next man you fought was the man whom would send you to the 7 hells. By the 7, I have enjoyed all of this. Thanks to the warrior, I fought well at all of those battles. The Crossroads, Autumnstead, Juniper Hall, and Spring Falls. If only the world knew I fought in these battles, none would ever doubt me. I would be remembered as a great stormlord and warrior worthy of the name Baratheon. Just as father had earned his reputation in the Stepstones. And great-grandfather Lionel earned undying fame as the Laughing Storm. Robert rode with Artyom by his side to the gates. He smiled when he saw the familiar gates. At the top of the gatehouse, stood 2 copper-leaping stags. It is Lord Baratheon. Open the gates, one shouted from the walls. Welcome home, my lord, another called as the gates opened. Robert nodded and smiled. My thanks. It is good to be home, he said. Robert continued to ride inside with Artyom by his side. Until they reached the entrance to the round hall. He beamed at seeing the towering heights from below on the ground. And he beamed when he saw his family. His brothers Stannis and Renly. Great-uncle Harbert. And the love of his life, Lyanna. He gasped when he saw Nara. Whom stood by Lyanna's side. And was holding Maya's hand in her own. Robert beamed when he saw Maya looking up at him. Papa, she cried excitedly. Robert climbed down from Storm Main. And before he could say anything, Maya charged towards him without hesitation. She held onto his leg, hugging him. Robert laughed as he took a knee and gently hugged her. Hello, my little girl. How are you? Have you been good to your mother? He asked as he picked her up. She giggled as she reached for his rough bearded cheek. Robert chuckled before kissing her forehead. I missed you, my little girl. I'm so happy to see you here, Robert whispered before he put her down on the ground and held her hand, walking with her to his family and to Lyanna. Robert hugged Renly, whom was getting taller every time that he saw him. Stannis even hugged him, if only briefly. And Uncle Harbert laughed with pride as the two shared a hug. Robert, dear lad. I heard all of the battles in the Riverlands and the Crownlands. Gods, I cannot wait to hear all your tales of them, he said before patting him on the back. Robert laughed before he turned to Lyanna. My lady, he said gently. Robert, she said with a beaming smile. A smile which made Robert beam happier than he had ever felt before. He kissed her hand. I am so glad to see you safe, he said. And I am happy to see you safe and back home, she said. Notes. Now Maya Stone and her mother are in Storm's End. And Robert and Lyanna are reunited. Chapter 78, A Father's Last Counsel. Summary. Ned returns home to Winterfell, to Benjen, to Ashura and to Prydain. Whilst Rhaegar has one last meeting with his father. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Eddard 16. Eddard smiled when at last he saw it. At the head of the army of Winterfell, he beamed at the sights, smells and sounds of the bustling Winter City and the great castle beyond. The castle whose towers, keeps and walls called to him. And those whom were there. Their faces and their names called him to them. Winterfell. At long last. I am home. And my family are all here. He beamed, feeling the sunshine on his face and the familiar chilling wind on his back. But as the east gate opened, he heard the cheers and applause of thousands of small folk in the Winter City. We return victorious, he thought as he smiled at how they cheered for his arrival and that of their loved ones behind him. He turned around to see the Winterfell army. He could see their beaming smiles. He could hear their chuckles. He could smell their happiness, which smelled like the sweetest tasting lemon cakes. We have won a great victory. Greater than what any could have imagined us win. The South will learn to fear the North now. And all enemies of House Stark will forever regret making an enemy of us. But as Eddard rode on the road familiar to him, he dispelled all those thoughts. When he was so close to seeing Benjen, Ash, and his son, Prydain, Eddard smiled when the gates opened. The gates opened and beyond them, in the courtyard, were the household guards of House Stark. Maester Wallers, Sir Roderick, Veon Poole. And then he saw his family. Benjen was standing with a wide grin at seeing him atop of Frostfoot. And then he saw Ash, whom was beaming lovingly at him. And then he laid eyes on her arms. Wrapped in towels in her arms was a tiny figure. He could see the tiny arms and the outline of a tiny face. Prydain. Eddard climbed down from Frostfoot. My lord. Welcome home, said Maester Wallers. Eddard hugged him. Thank you, Maester, he said before he turned to Benjen. Benjen. Little brother, said Eddard. Benjen laughed before hugging him. Gods, I have missed you, big brother. She's safe. Lyanna, he said as they broke from the hug. I know. We've been writing letters since she arrived in Storm's End, said Benjen. Eddard patted Benjen's back before he turned to Ash. He rushed towards her. He held his arms out and beamed as he held her. Gods, Ash, I have missed you so much, he said, his eyes close to filling with tears. And I have missed you, Ned, said Ash. They broke from the hug. Ned hungrily kissed her. They held the kiss for a moment before Ned heard a babe weeping. Ned looked down at the one in question. He beamed when he saw him properly. Just by looking at him, he thought of Brandon when he was a young boy. And yet he had his mother's black hair and her haunting violet eyes. Hello. Hello, Prydain, Eddard whispered. Ash gently passed him to Eddard. Eddard beamed as he looked down at him. He calmed instantly as he looked up at him. Hello, Prydain. I'm your father. Prydain smiled as he wiggled his tiny arms and legs around. Eddard leant down and kissed his forehead. My beautiful little boy, he said before he wrapped his arm around Ash and kissed her again. Roriga 13. Roriga glared as the guards brought him before him in the holding cell. This was to be their last meeting. The last time he would see him. Before his final voyage. He barely recognized him. During his captivity at Oberyn's hideout in Merling Rock, they had trimmed his long and whitening hair from his head and his beard. And they had cut his disgustingly long yellow fingernails and toenails. Roriga furiously stared down at him as he knelt before him. Leave me. The three guards left the two and walked swiftly away from the cell. Roriga glared back down at him. He glared at him in reply. Only now do you have any backbone and integrity. When you are king and I am but your prisoner, father snarled at him. Yes, I am king. I am king, and yet the first acts I must do as such are to repair all damages you have done to the realm. From murdering a Lord Paramount and his heir to what you have done to our family. To mother. A dragon owes no excuses. You are a fool if you think that Aegon the Conqueror forged the 7 kingdoms from love and kisses. These 7 kingdoms were made from fire and blood. And they have been held together by those 2 things ever since. It was your own mother that made you soft. And turned you into a pampered little lizard, and not a man. Not a dragon. You are no dragon, father. You are a pathetic and pitiful state of a man. Driven mad by imprisonment. First in Duskendale. Next in Merling Rock. You are not a dragon to have let yourself be imprisoned as such, Roriga snapped. He was enjoying mocking him. He wanted to make the most of this. Do it then. Get it over with, father snarled. Go on. I know you have wanted to do this for years. Prove yourself a dragon. Seal your reign with fire and blood, boy. Are you a dragon? Or are you a coward? Roriga shook his head. No. You are just as I always knew. A coward. You cannot decide what must be done. Nor when to do it. You don't have the backbone for it. You never have. At that, Roriger smirked. Father frowned with bemusement. He still wanted to enjoy himself. He wanted to see father squirm. He wanted to make him suffer for all that he had done to him, to mother, to Elia and to his children. You go to Winterfell, father. For all that you have done to mother. And I know that Eddard Stark will wish to personally pay his respects to you after what you did to his father and to his brother. Father's rheumy eyes opened wide and glared up at him saying these words. You will die for all that you have done. I only regret that I cannot be there to see it. At last, Roriger snapped. He punched father hard in the face. Father did not scream nor beg for mercy. He grimaced as he glared up at Roriger whilst blood spilled from his lip. You have always plotted against me. I should have killed you long ago, father snapped. Plotted against you. You never intended for me to be king. Or for me to live. All you cared for was to burn and to make people suffer. Your own family included. And you think that you are better than me, do you? What? Father shook his head with a malicious smirk. Just looking at you right now, I feel so much less pity for myself. Roriger raised his hand to slap him. Yes, go on. Slap me. Do it, despite knowing that it won't change a thing. Roriger lowered his arm. Change what? Father chuckled at that. Yes, they'll call you king. Yes, they'll smile at you. And nod. And they laugh behind their hands. Who knows? Perhaps they may laugh without fear of reprisal as they did to Tytos Lannister. This will only continue, the more you are outstripped by a boy who has accomplished far more in 6 moons than you have in your entire lifetime as a prince and ever will as king. Roriger wanted nothing more than to hit him again. To hurt him for all that he had done to him. To mother, to Elia and to his children. But he did not want to give in. To give him the satisfaction of winning. Yes, he is so quick. So clever. So full of promise. Mayhap, he is admired and feared across the entire realm in less than a year after all Tywin had done to be feared by all from Castamere to now. Less than a year as Lord of Winterfell, and he is loved by the North and more already. Of course he is. He commands. It is in him to lead. Not hammered in him like some dull lesson from Pycelle. Roriger frowned at father's words. The more Eddard Stark shines, the more of a court fool you become, my son. A court fool wearing a king's crown, he spat. Roriger did not like how he glared up at him. His glare turned into a smirk. Take my counsel, Roriger, from father to son. One last time. Strike now before you are found with a dagger in your back. Guards. 2 gold cloaks entered the holding cell. Take him to the black cells, Roriger commanded. They grabbed father by his manacled arms. They lifted him up without difficulty. But Roriger remained in the holding cell. And could continually hear father's words echoing in his head. Notes. As much as Roriger may hate him, Aerys' sharp tongue cut Roriger's mind. How will that play out? Chapter 79, The Mockingbird Flies Too High. Summary. Roriger's coronation in King's Landing. Whilst in Riverrun, Catelyn mourns Brandon still. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Baelor X. All nobility of the realm were gathered in the throne room. Having attended the coronation ceremony in the great September of Baelor, now the new king and queen of the 7 kingdoms were sat in the throne room. Baelor looked from the Iron Throne, and the king sat on it, and to his queen, whom he could not take his eyes off of. Though Aerys had been declared unfit to rule due to ill health previously, the truth had now been spread across the capital with all nobility of the 7 kingdoms in attendance. That Aerys had been usurped from the Iron Throne, and as a peace condition to the victorious Northern army, he had been sent by ship to White Harbor. The news of the war's end and the victory of the Starks against the mighty and feared Tywin Lannister had come as a shock to all noblemen of the Reach. None more so than Randil Tully, whom had confided to Baelor that I had thought that we would have damaged them to the extent that the Lannisters would finish them off. It is clear we underestimated them. Yes. The South from Riverrun to Sunspear, from Lannisport to King's Landing, have all underestimated the Northerners. Eddard Stark has shown the true strength of the North in this war. We made the mistake of looking down on them once. We can ill afford to do so again. Not when 85,000 fighting men of the South died to Northern arms. There once was a time in which the North was dismissed as a grey and frigid and cold wasteland of snow and ice. And its people little more than tree-worshipping savages. How wrong we all have been. But now, they have shown their strength. Eddard Stark has proven he is no meager commander. He commands a great and battle-hardened army. And he has control over the Kalin Canal. That which shall guarantee House Stark an incredible wealth. Baelor intended to go to see father back at Old Town. To discuss reaching out to the Northerners and offering a trade deal. To guarantee their ship's safe passage across the Kalin Canal. And hope that there would be no ill relations between them after the war. But Baelor's thoughts were interrupted by the booming voice of a herald. Now His Grace, King Roriger, and Her Grace, Queen Elia, shall hear the oaths of fealty from their subjects of the Reach. Baelor walked closely behind Mace, as heir to Old Town and representative of House Hightower. Mace, don't embarrass yourself when you are up there. Just keep it simple and brief. No stupid shows of chivalry. Or desperate attempts to gain favor with the new king. Little good did Baelor's inner monologue seem to do. For when Mace bent the knee to Roriger and Elia, he opened his mouth. From this day forth, my king and my queen, I vow to uphold my duties as Lord of Highgarden and Warden of the South, to be a faithful servant of the Iron Throne and to serve until my last dying day. You have our thanks for your loyalty and eagerness to serve, Lord Tyrell, Elia said sweetly. She spoke with a beautiful and bright smile, which only served to make Baelor's knees feel weak. Gods, why did you make Elia Martell the most perfect woman in the world? Mace eventually understood her meaning. He rose from where he knelt and then Baelor took his place. He shivered when Elia's eyes met his. Those eyes are just so beautiful. Black like onyx. Oberyn's are like a serpent's. But Elia's are like pure black diamonds. My king, my queen. As heir to Old Town and to House Hightower, I hereby pledge my allegiance and fealty to you, to your heirs and to House Targaryen in perpetuity from this day forth, Baelor pledged. As he spoke his oath, he made a sideways glance to Roriger, whom frowned just from looking at him. He's not still angry over Harrenhal, is he? Thank you, for your pledge to House Targaryen and to the Iron Throne this day, Sir Baelor. And do pass on our best wishes to your Lord Father, that he may recover from his illness swiftly and return to his duties and that we might see him again in our capital, said the Queen Mother. I would be glad to, Your Grace, Baelor said with a bow. As Baelor walked to the side of the throne room, just as the nobility of the Reach had finished giving their oaths of fealty and now it was the turn of the lords of the Riverlands, he glanced to the Iron Throne once again, where Elia was dutifully sat with Roriger. And Baelor smiled at seeing her smile. Roriger is now my king. And Elia is my queen. This was the first time he had seen her since Harrenhal. He had been longing to see her again. But now that she was queen, Baelor dreaded it. For she was sat with Roriger. Roriger, whom was king. And was father to her beautiful children. Baelor had to pretend to smile, not to let his true feelings show. Catelyn 6. Sat in her bedchambers, Catelyn looked up from her book and at the lady's favor still sat on her bedside table. She took a deep breath as she placed a goose feather in the book as a bookmark. She stood up and walked to her bedside table, inhaling and exhaling with each step. Until she reached it. She smiled as she picked it up and looked down on it. For this was no ordinary lady's favor. It was one she had made personally. Of a leaping and snarling stark direwolf. And a jumping tully trout. She had made it for Bran. Catelyn could remember beaming and giggling with excitement when she saw Brandon take the favor with him as he had unhorsed Oberyn Martell, Miles Manwuddy, Barman Byrch, Axel Florent, Miles Mouton and Richard Lunmouth. The night when Uncle Brynden had returned from the war, he had come to her bedchambers. He passed the lady's favor on to her. He had said that it was from Eddard, whom had said that Bran kept it close to him at all times since she gifted it to him. Catelyn wept that night as she kept it close to bed. Now it was all that she had of him. Of Bran. The longer she thought of that day when she gave it to him, the more she could remember his handsome and dashing face, his roguish grin and his calm grey eyes which made her feel at ease whenever they held hands. I'll never forget you, Bran, she thought as she put it back on her bedside table. She walked back to her chair and her desk. Caitlin sat back down as she picked her book up. But as she did so, she realized the few tears in her eyes. She inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly and gently as she wiped her eyes. Before she could open the book, she heard a knock on the door. His father returned. Father had left with Edmure the week before to go to King's Landing to swear fealty to Roriger. Now that Aes the Mad was all but dead, being shipped off to White Harbor and then to Winterfell. News which brought a smile to Caitlin's face. Yes, she asked. She stood up and placed the book down. She faced the door and the door opened. It was Petter. Cat. Forgive me. I just had to see you. Are you well? He asked. As well as one can be, she admitted with a slight frown. Quickly, Petter closed the distance between the two of them. Cat, I just need you to know that you are not alone. You will always have me, he said. But saying this, Caitlin felt uncomfortable. She felt uncomfortable with how close he was. How she could smell the wine on his breath. And how his grey-green eyes darted to her lips and to her shoulders and to her chest. Petter, leave please. I need to be alone, she asked gently. But it was as if she had not said anything at all. Cat, what is this? He asked in surprise. I asked that you leave me be, she replied. But don't you see? Cat, the gods have given us this chance, he insisted. Caitlin blanched at Petter reaching for her shoulder. She took 2 steps back and backed far away from him as far as she could. Cat. What are you doing, Petter? Leave me be, snapped Caitlin. The door slammed open with such force, Caitlin and Petter both shook. Caitlin exhaled a breath she was holding when she saw Uncle Brynden. She was delighted to see him. But he was not delighted to see Petter. Thank the Seven. What in the 7 hells is going on here? Uncle Brynden demanded to know. Petter gasped and shook when faced by Uncle Brynden. Sir Brynden, I was just seeing if Caitlin was well this night, he insisted. That is not what I heard, Littlefinger. I heard how she made it clear for you to leave her be. And for you to still make advances on her. Whatever Petter had been drinking, it seemed to have no effect on him now, Caitlin noticed. The swift and sharp rebuke from Uncle Brynden seemed to have instantaneously sobered Petter. Sir Brynden, forgive me. Cat, I am sorry, he begged as Uncle Brynden grabbed him by his shoulder. That is Lady Caitlin to you. Some time in a cell will remind you of your place. Uncle Brynden snapped as he dragged him out of Caitlin's bedchambers. Notes. Baylor yearns for Elia still. And in Riverrun, Littlefinger has earned himself a beating from Brynden and a night or 2 in the cells. Chapter 80, Promising News. Summary. Roriger sees his father leave. And the Triarchy hear the news of the Northern Rebellion. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Roriger 14. Roriger stood in the gardens of the Red Keep. He looked down on the northern ship docked in Blackwater Harbour. Flying the colours of House Marndaly of White Harbour and House Stark of Winterfell. The Merman's Trident, captained by Sir Wendell Marndaly. It had come 10 days ago. In preparation for swearing fealty to him as king, the northern nobility had boarded it to come to King's Landing. And swear fealty and allegiance to him, they did. At the head of them was Eddard Stark. But also boarding the ship, was the man whom had tormented Roriger for as long as he could remember. The monster that he still called his father. The monster that did harm and mistreat mother. But a monster that would never torment them ever again. Never again. Never again will you torment me, father. Nor mother. Nor Elia. Rhaenys. Aegon. Visenya. Nor will you ever poison my brother and sister. Daenerys and Viserys shall never fall victim to your lies. Nor your madness. All of House Targaryen will be ready for the day when the great peril comes to Westeros again. For only the dragons can stop it. But as the Northerners boarded the Merman's Trident, Roriger saw more activity taking place. He narrowed his eyes at what else was going on. Until he realized what it was. He saw numerous Northern sailors and local dockworkers bringing chests aboard the ship. Chests which contained the ransom which was to be paid to the Northerners as a condition of renewing fealty and ending the war. 2 million gold dragons of the royal treasury. Enough to ransom a king, a queen, a crown prince and a crown princess, Roriger thought as they loaded the last of the chests aboard. Seeing them load the gold aboard the merman's trident, Roriger was bitterly reminded of the gossip that surrounded the Northerners since their arrival in King's Landing. Roriger was angry that they were even there in the first place. In spite of what their presence meant for father. Even if they had come to swear fealty to him, he felt it an insult. After all, they had mocked him. They had defeated House Targaryen on the battlefield 4 times. And then they tricked him into lowering his guard. To the extent that they had been forced to give them compensations and concessions that only the Dornish had been given in exchange for bending the knee to Daeron too. Seeing Eddard Stark in the throne room, Roriger felt a shiver he had never felt before. Even when confronted by the madness of father in his darkest moments. Or seeing visions of the great peril in his dreams. Or seeing images of the great other in history books. And then there was the gossip spoken by the courtiers and nobility of the realm when they saw the presence of the Starks and their bannermen. All were in awe of the young wolf. The young wolf whom thwarted the last dragon and made the South think again as described by Olenna Tyrell. Roriger refused to even say it to his friends. Not to Arthur, to Oswell, to Richard or to Miles. Not even to Jon. He refused to even say the words aloud. But he feared him. He feared Eddard Stark. For he had friends and allies across the realm. He was a former foster brother to Elbereth Arryn and to Roriger's own cousin, Robert Baratheon. Robert, whom was betrothed to soon wed Eddard's sister, Lyanna. And his late father was close friends with Hoster and Brynden Tully. When Roriger had angrily told Elia that she had given them too much at Stokeworth, she had turned to him with a furious glare. And what would you have offered? They hold the future of the realm by its throat with a dagger. Any insult and they will slice it. With all of Stark's victories, he could do what Lionel Baratheon had done and declare himself king in the north. If he had done so, nothing could stop him. Roriger again remembered the last parting words father told him. Telling him of Stark. How the realm was in awe of him. And how Roriger would always been outshined by him. It made Roriger wonder if this was how father felt when Tywin Lannister was his hand of the king. Vargid X. Incredible. Simply incredible. Valerys will very interested to hear all of this. Especially his ward. Vargid thanked the merchant for the information. He left his company and turned around. He turned back to Valerys' manse. And he hastily walked towards the manse, knowing full well just how important this information was to Valerys. And Valerys' interests. He reached the main hallway of the manse. He saw 2 Unsullied stood guard outside of his solar doors. And just about to reach the doors was Batyatos and another slave, whom held a tray of drinks and a small platter of snacks. Batyatos spotted Vargid. You wish to see my master, Master Vargid? I do. He knocked on the door. Eksho. Master Vargid is here as well as drinks and refreshments. Both come in, Batyatos. One of the Unsullied opened the door. The slave with the platter and refreshments entered first, followed by Batyatos. And then by Vargid. Vargid took a snack, a cooked pastry with Tiroshi sea snail inside. One of Valerys' favorites. Vargid ate a bite before sitting down opposite Valerys and Maegor. Ah, Vargid. You come with a great bounce to your step. I presume that this means good news, he asked. Fantastic news, Valerys, he replied. Excellent. Do tell us, he said eagerly. As Vargid took a wine cup, filled up by the slave, Maegor turned to Valerys. News of what, he asked. News of the war in Westeros. That which involves our acquaintances, the Northerners, in their conflict with Aerys the Mad, your grace, Valerys replied. He gestured to Vargid. The Northerners won a crushing victory. Eddard Stark defeated the Targaryens in 4 great battles, killing more than 80,000 men and wounding less than 70,000 more, he replied. Is that so? Go on, said Valerys, intrigued. He could see from the movement in his eyebrows. My favorite part was how the Starks tricked Roriger. By lulling him into lowering his guard before they met with him to negotiate. Roriger had thought him weak and ready to surrender. Until he learned of Stark's victory against Tywin Lannister. At which point, he realized that no single Westeros army could defeat him. And so, Stark frightened him into giving him all that he wanted, including Roriger's father, alive. Valeries chuckled at hearing this news. Very intriguing. With such heavy casualties, it is clear information which only supports your cause, your grace, said Valeries. How? Would Stark support my ascension? Asked Maegor. I wouldn't say so. Not as of yet, anyway. But for now, he has unintentionally revealed a great many things about the state of the armies of Westeros. That 4 large armies could be so defeated by an army of 30,000 Northerners. Led by a boy whom never raised a sword in his life before. And with such heavy losses, well,